This is Audible.
Phoenix Audio presents
The Sands of Time, read by the author, Sidney Sheldon. Pamplona, Spain, July 13th, 1976. From midnight until 6 a.m., the visitors stayed awake, drinking and singing and making love, too excited to sleep. Those who would participate in the running of the bulls wore the red scarves around their throats. At 5:45 in the morning, bands started circulating through the streets, playing the exciting music of Navarre. At 7 o'clock sharp, a rocket flew into the air to signal that the gates of the corral had been opened. The crowd was filled with feverish anticipation. Moments later, a second rocket went up to warn the town that the bulls were running through the streets. What followed was never to be forgotten. It started as a faint, distant ripple on the wind, and then it grew louder and louder, until it became an explosion of pounding hoofs. The bulls raced down from the far end of the streets, and there were cries of "Olé" from the frenzied crowd. As the animals charged nearer, a mad scramble began to escape the sharp horns and lethal hoofs. A small boy and his grandfather were standing outside the barricades, both breathless with the excitement of the spectacle taking place only a few feet from them. "Look at them," the old man exclaimed. "Magnifico!" The little boy shuddered. "I'm afraid." The old man put his arm around him. "See, Manuelo, it is frightening. I once ran with the bulls. You test yourself against death, and it makes you feel like a man." As a rule, it took 2 minutes for the animals to gallop the 900 yards along the Calle Santo Domingo to the arena, and the moment the bulls were safely in the corral, a third rocket would be sent into the air. On this day, the third rocket did not go off. As the animals raced down the narrow street, half a dozen men dressed in the colorful costumes of the feria shifted the wooden barricades, and the bulls found themselves forced off the restricted street and turned loose into the heart of the city. What had a moment before been a happy celebration instantly turned into a nightmare. The frenzied beasts charged into the stunned onlookers. The young boy and his grandfather were among the first to die. Death was everywhere. The animals crashed into helpless bystanders, knocking down women and children, plunging their long, deadly horns into pedestrians. Inside the prison, a heavy-set guard was leading a man garbed in the plain black robes of a priest along the second-floor corridor. The policeman carried a submachine gun. The stench in the corridor near the cells was overpowering. The guard unlocked a cell door, then stepped cautiously back as the priest entered the cell. The guard locked the door again and stood in the corridor, alert for any sign of trouble. The priest went over to the figure lying on the dirty prison cot. The priest stared down at him. It was difficult to tell what the man looked like. His face was swollen and raw. His eyes were almost shut. Through thick lips he said, "I'm glad you were able to come, Father." The priest replied, "Your salvation is the church's duty, my son." The guard, listening outside the cell, thought to himself, "What a stupid waste of time. God will spit in that one's eye." When the priest was finished, he said, "Adios, my son. May God receive your soul in peace." The priest stepped into the second cell. The man inside had also been badly beaten. "What is your name, my son?" "Felix Carpio." He was a husky, bearded man with a fresh, livid scar on his cheek that the beard failed to conceal. "I'm not afraid to die, Father." "That is well, my son. In the end, none of us is spared." As the priest began to hear Carpio's confession, waves of distant sound, at first muffled, then growing louder, began to reverberate through the building. It was the thunder of pounding hoofs and the screams of the running mob. The guard listened, startled. "You'd better hurry, Father." The guard quickly unlocked the cell door. The priest stepped out into the corridor, and the guard locked the door behind him. There was the sound of a loud crash from the front of the prison. The guard turned to peer out the narrow barred window. What the hell was that noise? The priest stepped close to the guard, and the knife concealed beneath his robe plunged into the guard's chest. Dios in nomine patri, Jaime Miró said, piously crossing himself. The guard slumped to the cement floor. Jaime Miró took the keys from the body and swiftly opened the 2 cell doors. The sounds from the street were getting louder. "Let's move," Jaime Miró commanded. Madrid, July 14th, 1976. Prime Minister Leopoldo Martinez was in a rage. "Jaime Miró must be stopped," he cried. His voice was high and shrill. "Do you understand me?" He glared at the half-dozen men gathered in the room. Yesterday, Miró turned Pamplona into a battleground. Martinez slammed a fist down on his desk. He killed 2 prison guards and smuggled 2 of his murderers out of prison. Innocent people were killed by the bulls he let loose. The man at Martinez's right said quietly, "I'll find him." The speaker was Colonel Ramon Acoco, head of the GEO, the Grupo de Especial Operaciones formed to pursue Basque terrorists. He was a huge man with a scarred face. Jaime Miró had become an obsession with Colonel Acoco. "I want his head," Colonel Acoco said. "Cut off his head and the Basque movement dies." The goddamn church, Acoco thought. With Franco dead, it was interfering again. He turned to the Prime Minister. "I have had reports that the church is helping the Basque terrorists by letting them hide in their monasteries and convents. If the church is for the Basques, then it is against us." Colonel Acoco's voice hardened. "I would like your permission to teach the church a lesson." Avila, Spain, July 16th, 1976. The silence was like a gentle snowfall, soft and hushed, as soothing as the whisper of a summer wind, as quiet as the passage of stars. The Cistercian convent of the Strict Observance lay outside the walled town of Avila, the highest city in Spain, 112 kilometers northwest of Madrid. The convent had been built for silence. The rules had been adopted in 1601 and remained unchanged through the centuries. Liturgy, spiritual exercise, strict enclosure, penance, and silence. Always the silence. There were 40 nuns at the convent, praying in the church and living in the cloister. The convent at Avila was one of 7 left in Spain. Every window was covered with iron bars and was above the line of vision so that there would be no outside distractions. In 400 years, nothing inside the walls of the convent had changed except the faces. The sisters had no personal possessions, for they desired to be poor, emulating the poverty of Christ. The women who shared their lives with the Lord lived together, worked together, ate together, and prayed together, yet they never touched and never spoke. The nuns walked through the cloisters and corridors with downcast eyes, hands folded in their sleeves at breast level, passing and repassing their sisters without a word or a sign of recognition. The only voice of the convent was its bells, the bells that Victor Hugo called the opera of the steeples. The living conditions in the convent were Spartan. In winter the cold was knifing, and a chill, pale light filtered in through leaded windows. The nuns slept fully dressed on pallets of straw, covered with rough woolen sheets, each in her tiny cell, furnished only with a straight-backed wooden chair. There was no washstand. A small earthen jug and basin stood in a corner on the floor. There was no recreation of any kind, only work and prayers. It was a life more austere than in any prison, yet the inmates lived in an ecstasy such as they had never known in the outside world. Inside the convent reigned an all-pervading peace and the ineffable sense of joy at being one with God. There was an indescribable serenity within the walls of the convent and in the hearts of those who lived there. Sister Lucia was awakened by the tolling of the convent bell. She opened her eyes, startled and disoriented for an instant. The little cell she slept in was dismally black. The sound of the bell told her that it was 3 a.m., when the office of vigils began, while the world was still in darkness. "This goddamn routine is going to kill me," Sister Lucia thought. "In another month or two, when the police stop looking for me, I'll be out of this nut house." After morning prayers, Sister Lucia marched with the others to the dining room, surreptitiously breaking the rule, as she did every day, by studying their faces. There were two faces that Lucia found particularly interesting. One was Sister Teresa, a woman who appeared to be in her 60s. She was far from beautiful, and yet there was a spirituality about her that gave her an almost unearthly loveliness. She seemed always to be smiling inwardly, as though she carried some wonderful secret within herself. Another nun that Lucia found fascinating was Sister Graciela. She was a stunningly beautiful woman in her early 30s. She had olive skin, exquisite features, and eyes that were luminous black pools. She could have been a movie star, Lucia thought. What's her story? Why would she bury herself in a joint like this? I'm better off than they are, because they're stuck here for the rest of their lives, while I'll be out of here in a month or two. Maybe 3, Lucia thought. This is a perfect hiding place. I'd be a fool to rush out of here. In a few months, the police will figure I'm dead. Then I'll leave here and get my money out of Switzerland. In the early hours of the morning, Colonel Ramon Acoca and his men attacked the convent. Colonel Acoca warned, "Jaime Moreau and his men will be armed. Take no chances." Sister Megan was awakened by the silence. It was a different silence, a moving silence, a hurried rush of air, a whisper of bodies. She rose quietly in the darkness and opened the door to her cell. Unbelievably, the long stone corridor was filled with men. A giant with a scarred face was coming out of the Reverend Mother's cell, pulling her by the arm. "Where are you hiding him?" Colonel Acoca demanded. The Reverend Mother Bettina had a look of stunned horror on her face. "Shh! This is God's temple. You are desecrating it." Acoca's men began to spread out, invading the chapel, the refectory, and the cells. As Acoca passed one of the cells, a scream echoed from it. Acoca looked in and saw one of his men ripping the habit from a nun. Acoca moved on. Sister Lucia was awakened by the sounds of men's voices yelling. She sat up in a panic. "The police have found me," was her first thought. "I've got to get the hell out of here." The men were getting more and more violent, smashing everything in sight. Colonel Acoca watched them approvingly. Suddenly, the Reverend Mother remembered the solid gold cross that was the convent's one treasure. When Sister Teresa appeared at her side, the Reverend Mother whispered, "Get the gold cross and take it to the convent at Mendavia." Sister Teresa hurried off to the chapel and returned with the cross safely wrapped in canvas. Lucia, Megan, and Graciela were watching the mayhem in horror. Lucia turned to Teresa, Megan, and Graciela. "I don't know about you 3, but I'm getting the hell out of here." A man suddenly appeared in front of them. "Going somewhere, ladies?" "Get back. My friends have plans for you." Lucia said, "We have a gift for you." She picked up one of the heavy metal candlesticks that lined the hallway tables and smiled. The man was looking at it, puzzled. "What can you do with that?" "This." Lucia swung the candelabra against his head, and he fell to the ground unconscious. A moment later, Lucia, Megan, and Graciela and Teresa were outside in the front courtyard, hurrying through the gate into the starry night. Lucia said impatiently, "The mountains. Get up to the mountains. Follow me." The others watched, and after a moment they began to trail after her one by one. From time to time, Lucia looked back to make sure they were following. Why can't I mind my own business? At the abbey, the raid had come to an end. The dazed nuns, their habits wrinkled and blood-stained, were being rounded up and put into unmarked, closed trucks. "Take them back to my headquarters in Madrid," Colonel Lococo ordered. "Keep them in isolation." "What charge?" "Harboring terrorists." "Yes, Colonel," Patricio Arrieta said. He hesitated. "4 of the nuns are missing." Colonel Lococo's eyes turned cold. "Find them." Lucia and the 3 sisters traveled through the night, moving north into the mountains, heading away from Avila and the convent. Their garb was ill-equipped for the rugged terrain they were traveling through. Their sandals were too thin to protect their feet against the stony ground, and their habits caught on everything. Finally, it was dawn, and in the light, freedom seemed even more terrifying than before. After all the years of silence, they found it difficult to speak. Only Lucia seemed uninhibited and sure of herself, and the others automatically turned to her for leadership. "I'll get rid of them tonight," Lucia thought, "and head for Switzerland where my money is waiting for me." The problem was that she had no way of getting there. And then Lucia caught a glimpse of the gold cross that Sister Teresa was carrying. "That's it. I'll steal it." Sister Graciela was frightened. She had been in the convent for the last 15 years, and the outside world was filled with terrors. She thought about the little town she had grown up in. Las Neves del Marqués, Spain, 1947. She was 5 years old. Her earliest memories were of a procession of naked strangers climbing in and out of her mother's bed. Her mother explained, "They are your uncles. You must show them respect." The men were gross and crude and lacked affection. They stayed for a night, a week, a month, and then vanished. When they left, Dolores Pinero would immediately look for a new man. In her youth, Dolores Pinero had been a beauty, and Graciela had inherited her mother's looks. Even as a child, Graciela was stunning to look at, with high cheekbones and olive complexion, shiny black hair and thick, long eyelashes. Her young body was nubile with promise. With the passage of years, Dolores Pinero's body had turned to fat, and her wonderful boned face had become bruised with the bitter blows of time. Graciela's mother despised her daughter, for she was a constant reminder of the one man Dolores Pinero had ever loved. Graciela's father was a handsome young mechanic who had proposed to the beautiful young Dolores, and she had eagerly let him seduce her. When she had broken the news that she was pregnant, he had disappeared, leaving Dolores with the curse of his seed. Dolores Pinero had a vicious temper, and she took her vengeance out on the child. Any time Graciela did something to displease her, her mother would hit her and scream, "You're as stupid as your father." There was no way for the child to escape the rain of blows or the constant screaming. Graciela would wake up every morning and pray, "Please, God, don't let Mama beat me today." Graciela and her mother shared a small 2-room casa. The girl slept on a couch in the tiny room with only a thin, worn curtain separating it from the bedroom. There was no way to shut out the sounds from her mother's bed. On Sundays, Graciela rose early and dressed quietly, careful not to awaken her mother and whichever uncle was in her bed, and walked to the San Juan Bautista Church, where Father Perez talked of the joys of life after death, a fairy tale life with Jesus. Graciela would appear at church every Sunday morning wearing a clean, neat outfit that he was sure she had washed herself. Father Perez knew she was shunned by the other children in town, and his heart went out to her. He made it a point to spend a few moments with Graciela after the service each Sunday. If the days were bearable, the nights were an agony. Through the thin curtain that separated their beds, Graciela could hear the sounds of savage moaning and writhing and heavy breathing. When Graciela was 14 years old, the Moor moved in. He was the biggest man Graciela had ever seen. His skin was shiny black, and his head was shaved. The Moor had arrived in the middle of the night when Graciela was asleep, and she got her first sight of him in the morning when he pushed the curtain aside and walked stark naked past Graciela's bed to go outside to the outhouse and back. Graciela looked at him and almost gasped aloud. He was enormous in every part. That will kill my mother, Graciela thought. Early one Sunday morning, Graciela rose to get ready for church. As she pulled off her nightgown, the curtain was pushed aside and the Moor appeared. He was naked. "Where's your mother?" "Mama went out early. She had some errands to do." The Moor was studying Graciela's nude body. "You really are a beauty," he said softly. Graciela felt her face flush. She knew what she should do. She should cover her nakedness, put on her skirt and blouse, and leave. Instead, she stood there, unable to move. She was watching his penis begin to swell and grow before her eyes, getting larger and larger. She felt faint. The Moor said huskily, "You're a child. Get your clothes on and get out of here." And Graciela found herself moving toward him. She reached up and slid her arms around his waist and felt his male hardness against her body. "No," she moaned, "I'm not a child. Take me." The pain that followed was like nothing Graciela had ever known. It was excruciating, unbearable. It was wonderful, exhilarating, agonizing, beautiful. She held the Moor tightly in her arms, screaming with pain and the ecstasy. He brought her to orgasm after orgasm, and Graciela thought, so this is what the mystery is all about. "What are you doing?" It was Dolores Pinero's voice screaming. And for an instant, everything stopped, frozen in time. Dolores Pinero was standing at the side of the bed, staring down at her daughter and the Moor. Graciela looked up at her mother, too terrified to speak. Dolores Pinero's eyes were filled with an insane rage. She picked up a heavy iron ashtray at the bedside and slammed it against her daughter's head. That was the last thing Graciela remembered. She awoke in a large white hospital ward with 24 beds in it, all of them occupied. Graciela's body was wrecked with excruciating pain. Each time she moved, rivers of fire flowed through her. She lay there listening to the cries and moans of the other patients. Late in the afternoon, a young intern stopped by the side of her bed. He was in his early 30s, but he looked old and tired. "You're in the charity ward of the Hospital Provincial in Avila. You were brought in yesterday. You were in terrible shape." On the second day, Father Perez came to see Graciela. A nurse moved a chair to the bedside. The priest looked at the beautiful, pale young girl lying there, and his heart melted. Father Perez asked, "Are you feeling better, child?" Graciela nodded, and the movement made her head pound. What he had to say was painful beyond words. "Graciela, I spoke with your mother." And Graciela knew. I can't go home again, can I?" "No, my child." When he left, Graciela lay there and she prayed, "Dear God, please let me die. I don't want to live." The following day, the intern appeared again. "I have good news," he said awkwardly. "You're well enough to leave now." She was free to go, but go where? 15 minutes later, Father Perez was helping Graciela out of the hospital door into the warm sunlight. When they were seated in his office, the priest said, "Graciela, have you ever thought of entering a convent?" No. She was startled by the idea. Graciela thought of those Sunday mornings and the beauty of the church services and how she had longed to be with Jesus and escape from the pain of life she lived. "There is a convent here in Avila, the Cistercian convent. They would take care of you there." I don't know. The idea was frightening. "It is not for everyone, and I must warn you, it is the strictest order of them all. Once you walk through the gates and take the vows, you may never leave." "It's up to you, my child. If you like, I will take you to meet the Reverend Mother Prioress." Graciela nodded. "All right." The Reverend Mother studied the face of the young girl before her. "How old are you, my dear?" 14. "She's old enough. In the 4th century, the Pope decreed that girls could be permitted to become nuns at the age of 12. The Reverend Mother took Graciela's hand. "Take your time, Graciela. God won't go away. Think about it, and come back and we can discuss it." But what was there to think about? I've nowhere else in the world to go, Graciela thought. And the silence would be welcome. I have heard too many terrible sounds. She looked at the Reverend Mother and said, "I will welcome the silence." That had been 17 years earlier, and in that time Graciela had found peace for the first time in her life. Her life was dedicated to God. She was Christ's bride, and at the end of her life, she would join him. As the years passed in deep silence, the terrible sounds in her mind gradually faded away. Not until they had reached the outskirts and headed toward the mountains did Lucia begin to relax. They moved steadily north, climbing upward, making slow progress in the hilly terrain. When they reached a small glade in the highland, surrounded by trees, Lucia said, "We can spend the night here. In the morning we'll head for the convent at Mendavia." She lay there on the grass, and she let her thoughts drift back in time. Taormina, Sicily, 1968. They lived in a large storybook villa, filled with more servants than the 15-year-old Lucia could count. A bodyguard drove her to school each morning in an armored limousine. She was Lucia Maria Carmine, the daughter of Angelo Carmine, and that was enough to make anyone in the world happy. She grew up with the prettiest dresses and the most expensive toys in all of Sicily, and she was the envy of her schoolmates. But it was her father around whom Lucia's life centered. In her eyes, he was the most handsome man in the world. He was short and heavy-set, with a strong face and stormy brown eyes that radiated power. He had 2 sons, Arnaldo and Victor, but it was his daughter whom Angelo Carmine adored, and Lucia worshipped him. In church, when the priest spoke of God, Lucia always thought of her father. If her face fell just short of being beautiful, her body more than made up for it. At 15, Lucia had the body of a woman with round, firm breasts, a narrow waist, and hips that moved with sensuous promise. "We're going to have to marry you off early," her father would tease her. "Soon you will drive the young men pazzo, my little virgin." Lucia blushed. "Yes, Papa." It was true that no one had made love to her, not for the past 12 hours. Benito Pattis, one of her bodyguards, always came to her bed when her father was out of town. Having Benito make love to her in her house added to the thrill, because Lucia knew that her father would kill them both if he ever discovered what was going on. Angelo Carmine had started out as an errand boy for the mafiosi when he was 12. By 15, he had become an enforcer for the loan sharks, and at 16, he had killed his first man and made his bones. In the years that followed, Angelo Carmine had climbed the treacherous corporate ladder to the top, leaving a string of dead enemies behind him. To Lucia, her father was a knight in shining armor. To Lucia, her father and brothers were model citizens. The proof of it lay in her father's friends. Once a week, Angelo Carmine gave an enormous dinner party at the villa. And oh, the people who would be seated at the Carmine table. The mayor would be there, and a few aldermen and judges, and seated next to them were movie stars and opera singers, and often the chief of police and a monsignor. Several times a year the governor himself would appear. Lucia lived an idyllic life, filled with parties and beautiful clothes and jewels, cars and servants and powerful friends. And then, one February, on her 23rd birthday, it all came to an abrupt end. It began innocuously enough. "Forgive me, Patroni," the police chief apologized to Angelo Carmine, but this is a stupid formality which the commissioner is forcing me to go through. If you will be kind enough to accompany me to the police station, I will see to it that you are home in time to enjoy your daughter's birthday party." Angelo Carmine was not home for the party that day, nor the next. In fact, he never saw any of his homes again. The state filed a 100-count indictment against him that included murder, drug trafficking, prostitution, arson, and scores of other crimes. Bail was denied. A police dragnet went out that swept up Carmine's crime organization. He had counted on his powerful connections in Sicily to have the charges against him dismissed. But instead he was taken to Rome in the middle of the night and booked at the Regina Coeli, the notorious Queen of Heaven prison. He was put in a small cell that contained barred windows, a radiator, a cot, and a toilet with no seat. It was an indignity beyond imagining. In the beginning, Angelo Carmine was sure that his attorney would have him released immediately. When Cortono came to the visiting room of the prison, Carmine stormed at him. "They've closed down my whorehouses and drug operations, and they know everything about my money laundering operation. Somebody is talking. Find out who it is and bring me his tongue." "Do not worry, Petroni," the lawyer assured him. "We will find him." His optimism turned out to be unfounded. When Angelo Carmine was marched into the courtroom, his heart leaped for joy, for the judge on the bench was Giovanni Buscetta, a man who had been on the Carmine payroll for the last 15 years and who was a frequent guest at the Carmine house. The trial began. Angelo Carmine looked to Omerta, the Sicilian code of silence, to protect him. But to his astonishment, the chief witness for the state turned out to be none other than Benito Pattis, the bodyguard. Benito Pattis had been so trusted that he had been allowed to be in the room at meetings where confidential matters of business were discussed. When the police had apprehended Pattis, minutes after he had cold-bloodedly murdered and mutilated the new boyfriend of his mistress, they had threatened him with life imprisonment, and Pattis had reluctantly agreed to help the police build their case against Carmine in exchange for a lighter sentence. Now, to Angelo Carmine's horrified disbelief, he sat in the courtroom and listened to Pattis reveal the innermost secrets of the Carmine fiefdom. Lucia was also in the courtroom every day, listening to the man who had been her lover, destroying her father and her brothers. Lucia was allowed to visit her father in prison. He greeted her cheerfully. He hugged her and whispered, "Do not worry, Faccio dell'Angelo. Judge Giovanni Buscetta is my secret ace in the hole. He knows all the tricks of the law. He will use them to see that your brothers and I are acquitted." Angelo Carmine proved to be a poor prophet. The public had been outraged by the excesses of the mafia, and when the trial finally ended, Judge Giovanni Buscetta, an astute political animal, sentenced the mafia members to long prison terms and sentenced Angelo Carmine and his two sons to the maximum permitted by Italian law, life imprisonment. For Angelo Carmine, it was a death sentence. Once again, Lucia was allowed to visit her father in his cell. The overnight change in him was heartbreaking. In the space of a few days, he had become an old man. His figure had shrunk, and his healthy, ruddy complexion had turned sallow. "They have betrayed me," he moaned. "They have all betrayed me. Judge Giovanni Buscetta, I owned him, Lucia. I made him a wealthy man, and he did this terrible thing to me. And Pattis, I was like a father to him. What has the world come to? Whatever happened to honor? They are Sicilians like me." Lucia took her father's hand in hers and said in a low voice, "I am a Sicilian too, Papa. You shall have your vengeance. I swear it to you on my life." "My life is over," her father told her, "but yours is still ahead of you. I have a numbered account in Zurich, the Bank Lieu. There is more money there than you could spend in 10 lifetimes." He whispered a number in her ear. "Leave cursed Italy. Take the money and enjoy yourself." "Yes, Papa, but there is something I have to do first. A few weeks after her father and brothers had started serving their prison sentences, Lucia Carmine appeared at the home of Judge Giovanni Buscetta. The judge himself opened the door. "I have come to thank you, Your Honor." He studied her suspiciously. "Thank me for what?" Lucia looked deep into his eyes. "For exposing my father and brothers for what they were. I was an innocent, living in that house of horrors. I had no idea what monsters—" She broke down and began to sob. Judge Buscetta noticed, not for the first time, what a beautiful young girl Lucia was. She was wearing a simple black dress that revealed the outlines of her lush body. He looked at her rounded breasts and could not help observing how grown up she had become. It would be amusing, Buscetta thought, to sleep with the daughter of Angelo Carmine. He's powerless to hurt me now. The old bastard thought he owned me, but I was too smart for him. Lucia's probably a virgin. I could teach her a few things in bed. An elderly housekeeper brought in a tray of tea and a platter of cookies, then left the room. The judge watched as Lucia walked over to the small table where the tray had been set down and carefully poured out tea for the judge and herself. "I have a feeling you and I could become very good friends, Lucia," Giovanni Buscetta said, probing. Lucia gave him a seductive smile. "I would like that very much, Your Honor. Please, Giovanni." "Giovanni." Lucia handed him his cup. She raised her cup in a toast. "To the death of villains." Smiling, Buscetta lifted his cup. "To the death of villains." He took a swallow and grimaced. The tea tasted bitter. Lucia raised her cup again. "To our friendship." She took another sip and he joined her. "To—" Buscetta never finished his toast. He was seized by a sudden spasm, and he felt a red-hot poker stabbing at his heart. He grabbed his chest. "Oh, my God! Call a doctor!" Lucia sat there, calmly sipping her tea, watching him stumble to his feet and fall to the floor. He lay there, his body twitching, and then he was still. "That's one papa," Lucia said. Benito Pattis was in his cell playing solitaire when the jailer announced, "You have a conjugal visitor." Benito beamed. He had been given special status as an informer, with many privileges, and conjugal visits was one of them. He studied himself in the little mirror hanging on the wall of his cell, put some pomade on his hair, slicked it back, then followed the guard through the prison corridor to the section where there were private rooms. The guard motioned him inside. Pattis strutted into the room, filled with anticipation. He stopped and stared in surprise. "Lucia, my God, what the hell are you doing here? How did you get in?" Lucia said softly, "I told them we were engaged, Benito." She was wearing a stunning red low-cut silk dress that clung to the curves of her body. Benito Pattis backed away from her. "Get out." "If you wish. But there's something you should hear first. When I saw you get up on the stand and testify against my father and brothers, I hated you. I wanted to kill you." She moved closer to him. "But then I realized that what you were doing was an act of bravery. You dared to stand up and tell the truth. My father and my brothers were not evil men, but they did evil things, and you were the only one strong enough to stand up against them." She was close to him now, and he could smell her heady perfume. His mind was in a state of confusion. Her fingers went to her shoulder straps, and an instant later her dress shimmered to the floor. She was naked. My God, she was beautiful. Lucia moved close to him, and her body brushed against his. "Get undressed," she whispered. "Hurry." She watched Pattis as he undressed. When he was naked, he took her hand and led her to the little bed in the corner of the room. He did not bother with foreplay. In a moment he was on top of her, an arrogant smile on his face. "It's like old times," he said smugly. "You couldn't forget me, could you?" "No," Lucia whispered in his ear. "And do you know why I couldn't forget you?" "No, mi amore, tell me." "Because I'm Sicilian like my father." Benito Pattis felt something stab him under his rib cage, and the sudden pain made him open his mouth to scream. But Lucia's mouth was on his, kissing him, and as Benito's body bucked and writhed on top of her, Lucia had an orgasm. A few minutes later she was clothed again, and the dagger she had concealed was under the mattress. Benito was under the blanket, his eyes closed. Lucia knocked at the cell door and smiled at the guard who opened it to let her out. "He's asleep," she whispered. The guard looked at the beautiful young woman and smiled. "You probably wore him out." The sheer daring of the two murders took Italy by storm. The beautiful young daughter of a mafioso had avenged her father and brothers, and the excitable Italian public cheered her, rooting for her to escape. The police, quite naturally, took a rather different point of view. In the beginning, Lucia's only thought had been to avenge the honor of her father and brothers. She had fully expected to be caught and was prepared to sacrifice herself. When she had managed to walk out of the prison and make her escape, however, her thoughts changed from vengeance to survival. Now that she had accomplished what she had set out to do, life suddenly became precious again. "I'm not going to let them capture me," she vowed to herself. Never. She lightened her hair, stained her teeth, and bought herself glasses and some ill-fitting clothes. "It's not too bad," she thought. 24 hours later, Lucia was looking at a passport in the name of Lucia Roma, with a photograph taken in her new persona. It was at the Spanish border that things started to go wrong. "Passport, please." Lucia handed the Spanish immigration officer her passport. He gave it a cursory glance and started to hand it back. But something made him hesitate. He took a closer look at Lucia, and his expression changed. "Just a moment, please. I will have to have this stamped inside." He recognized me, Lucia thought desperately. She watched him walk into the little office kiosk and show the passport to another officer. She had to escape. She opened the door on the driver's side and stepped out. A group was noisily boarding an excursion bus next to Lucia's car. The sign on the front of the bus read, "Madrid." Lucia glanced toward the hut. The guard who had taken her passport was yelling into the telephone. Without a second thought, Lucia moved toward the laughing, chattering tour group and stepped out of the bus, averting her face from the guide. She took a seat in the rear of the bus, keeping her head down. "Move," she prayed, "now." As though in answer to Lucia's prayer, the bus door closed and the engine sprang into life. What would happen when the border guards found that she had left her car? Their first thought would be that she had gone to the ladies' room. They would wait and finally send someone in to get her. Their next step would be to search the area to see if she had hidden somewhere. By then, dozens of cars and buses would have passed through. The police would have no idea where she had gone nor in which direction she was traveling. At the walled city of Avila, the tour bus made a scheduled stop for refreshments and what the guide delicately referred to as a comfort station. Lucia stayed in her seat, watching the passengers rise and scramble for the front door of the bus. "I'll be safer if I stay here." But the guide noticed her. The guide said, "You are not of this tour." "No," she said. "You see, my car broke down in San Sebastian, and it is very important that I get to Madrid, so I—" "Nein," the guide bellowed. "This is a private tour. You will get me in trouble. Go away or I will call the police." Lucia watched the bus pull away and roar down the highway toward Madrid. She was stranded, with no passport and almost no money, and by now the police of half a dozen countries would be looking for her to arrest her for murder. She turned into the Calle de la Madrid Soledad with its granite buildings and black-wrought iron balconies. And when she reached the Plaza de la Santa, she sat down on a park bench. 100 yards away, several women and some couples were seated in the park enjoying the afternoon sunshine. A police car appeared. It pulled up at the far end of the square, and 2 policemen got out. They moved over to one of the women seated alone and began questioning her. Lucia's heart began to beat faster. "They're looking for me." She forced herself to get to her feet slowly, her heart pounding, and turned away from the policeman and kept walking. Lucia heard the sound of a church bell and looked up through the open city gate. In the distance, high on a hill, rose the walls of an abbey. She stood there, staring at it. "Why have you come to us, my daughter?" the Reverend Mother Bettina asked softly. "I need a place of refuge. And you have decided to seek the refuge of God? Exactly. Yes, Lucia began to improvise. This is what I have always wanted, to devote myself to the life of the Spirit. In our souls, it is what we all wish for, is it not, daughter? Jesus, she's really falling for it, Lucia thought happily. The Reverend Mother went on. You must understand that the order of the Abbey Cistercian is the strictest of all the orders, my child. We are completely isolated from the outside world. Her words were music to Lucia's ears. Those who enter these walls may never leave. I never want to leave, Lucia assured her. Not for the next few months, anyway. She looked the Mother Prioress in the eye. I want to be here more than I want to be anywhere else in the world. Lucia's voice rang with truth. The Reverend Mother Bettina said, I will find you a bed for the night. In the morning you will begin instructions, and when they are finished, if you still feel the same, you will be sworn into the order. But I warn you, it is a very difficult path you have chosen. Believe me, Lucia said earnestly, I have no choice. The night wind was soft and warm, whispering its way across the wooded glade, and Lucia slept. In her dream she was at a party in a beautiful villa, and her father and brothers were there, and everyone was having a wonderful time. And a stranger walked into the room and said, Who the hell are these people? And the lights went out, and a bright flashlight shone in her face, and she came awake and sat up, the light blinding her. There were 6 men surrounding the nuns in the clearing. With the light in her eyes, Lucia could only dimly make out their shapes. Who are you? The man demanded again. His voice was deep and rough. Lucia was instantly awake, her mind alert. She was trapped. But if these men were from the police, they would have known who the nuns were. And what were they doing in the woods at night? Lucia took a chance. We are sisters from the convent at Avila, she said. Some government men came and... We heard about it, the man interrupted. The other sisters were all sitting up now, awake and terrified. Who are you? Megan asked. My name is Jaime Moreau. There were 6 of them, dressed in rough trousers, leather jackets, turtleneck sweaters and canvas rope-soled shoes, and the traditional Basque berets. They were heavily armed, and in the dim moonlight they had a demonic look. 2 of the men looked as though they had been badly beaten. The man who called himself Jaime Moreau was tall and lean with fierce black eyes. They could have been followed here. He turned to one of the members of his band. Have a look around. See? Lucia realized that it was a woman who answered. Lucia watched her move silently into the trees. What are we going to do with them? Ricardo Mulatto asked. Jaime Moreau said, Nada. We leave them and move on. One of the men protested, Jaime, these are little sisters of Jesus. Then let Jesus take care of them, Jaime Moreau said curtly. We have work to do. Felix Carpio, one of his lieutenants, said, We could escort them part of the way, Jaime, just until they get away from here. He turned to the nuns. Where are you sisters headed? Teresa spoke up. There is a convent at Mondavia that will shelter us. Felix Carpio said to Jaime Moreau, We could escort them there. Mondavia is on our way to San Sebastian. Jaime Moreau turned on him, furious. You damn fool! Why don't you put up a signpost telling everyone where we're going? I only meant, now we have no choice. We'll have to take them with us. If a Coco finds them, they'll talk. They're going to slow us down and make it that much easier for a Coco and his butchers to track us. Another one of the men, Rubio Arzano, said, We have some clothes that may make you less conspicuous. Moreau said, We'll split up. We'll take 3 different routes. We'll all meet at Legrano in 7 days. Keep away from the main roads. Sister Megan stood quietly listening to the man who was giving orders. He was rude and arrogant, but somehow he seemed to radiate a reassuring sense of power. Jaime Moreau looked over at Teresa and pointed to Thomas Sanjura and Rubio Arzano. They will be responsible for you. Sister Teresa said, God is responsible for me. "Sure," Jaime replied dryly. "I suppose that's how you got here in the first place." Rubio walked over to Teresa. "Rubio Arzano at your service, sister. How are you called?" "I am Sister Teresa." Lucia was not about to let the cross out of her sight. She spoke up quickly. "I will travel with Sister Teresa." Jaime Moreau nodded. "All right." He pointed to Graciela. "Ricardo, you'll take this one." "Good." Jaime Moreau looked at Megan. "You come with us, sister." Megan nodded. Jaime Moreau fascinated her, and there was something intriguing about the woman. She was dark and fierce-looking with the hawk-like features of a predator. Her mouth was a red wound. There was something intensely sexual about her. The woman walked up to Megan. "I'm Amparo Giron. Keep your mouth shut, sister, and there will be no trouble." Lucia, Sister Teresa, Rubio Arzano, and Thomas Sanjuro walked northeast, heading toward Olmeda, staying away from the main roads and walking through fields of grain. They walked through the night, and at dawn they headed for a secluded spot in the hills. Rubio Arzano said, "The town of Olmeda is just ahead. We'll stop here until nightfall. You both look as though you could use some sleep." Sister Teresa was physically exhausted, but something was happening to her emotionally that was far more disturbing. She felt that she was losing touch with reality. It had begun with the disappearance of her precious rosary. It had been her solace for more years than she could remember. How many thousands of Hail Marys, and how many Lord's Prayers, and how many Hail, Holy Queens. It had become a part of her security, and now it was missing. Even as a child, the church had been her solace. Even as a child. Aix, France, 1924. When she was only 8 years old, most of the happiness in Teresa de Fas's life came from the church. It was like a sacred flame drawing her to its warmth. She visited the Chapelle des Pénitents Blancs and prayed at the cathedral in Monaco and Notre Dame Bon Voyage in Cannes, but most frequently she attended services at the church in Aix. Teresa lived in a chateau on a mountain above the medieval village of Aix, near Monte Carlo, overlooking the Côte d'Azur. The village was perched high on a rock, and it seemed to Teresa that she could look down upon the whole world. There was a monastery at the top, with rows of houses cascading down the side of the mountain to the blue Mediterranean below. Monique, a year younger than Teresa, was the beauty in the family. Even when she was a child, one could see that she would grow up to be an exquisite woman. She had fine-boned features, sparkling blue eyes, and an easy self-assurance that suited her looks. Teresa was the ugly duckling. The truth was that the de Fosses were embarrassed by their elder daughter. The problem was that all of Teresa's features were just slightly askew. Everything seemed out of place, as though she were a comedian who had donned her face for laughter. But if God had cheated her in the matter of looks, he had compensated for it by blessing her with a remarkable gift. Teresa had the voice of an angel. Teresa's parents behaved properly toward their elder daughter. They fulfilled their parental duty punctiliously, but it was obvious that it was Monique they adored. The one ingredient that Teresa longed for was missing: love. Where Teresa found love was in the church. The priest loved her, and Jesus loved her. When she sang there, Teresa was filled with a sense of hope, of expectation. It was the only thing that made her life bearable. As the girls grew into their teens, Monique grew more beautiful. The boys came flocking around Monique, while Teresa stayed in her room sewing or reading or went shopping in the village. Teresa still sang in church on Sundays, and because of that, an event occurred that almost changed her life. In the congregation was a Madame Neff, the aunt of a radio station director in Nice. She stopped to speak to Teresa one Sunday morning. "You're wasting your life here, my dear. You have an extraordinary voice. You should be using it." "I am using it." "I'm talking about you using your voice professionally. I pride myself on knowing talent when I hear it. I want you to sing for my nephew. He could put you on the radio. Are you interested? I don't know. The very thought of it terrified Teresa. Talk it over with your family. I think it's a wonderful idea, Teresa's mother said. It could be a good thing for you, her father agreed. The following Wednesday, a very nervous Teresa appeared at the radio station in Nice and met the director. I'm Louis Bonnet, he said curtly. I can give you 5 minutes. Teresa's physical appearance only confirmed his worst fears. His aunt had sent him talent before. Bonnet placed her in front of a microphone. I don't have a piano player around today, so you're going to have to sing a cappella. Do you know what a cappella means? Yes, sir. Wonderful. I'll be in the control booth. You'll have time for one song. He was gone. Teresa was alone in the room, staring at the microphone in front of her. She had no idea what she was going to sing. I've got to get out of here. Louis's voice came out of nowhere. I don't have all day. I'm sorry, I can't. But the director was determined to punish her for wasting his time. Just a few notes, he insisted. Enough so he could report to his aunt what a fool the girl had made of herself. Perhaps that would persuade her to stop sending him her protégés. He heard it then, and he could not believe it. It was a voice so pure and so sweet that it sent chills down his spine. It was a voice filled with longing and desire, a voice that sang of loneliness and despair, of lost loves and dead dreams, and it brought tears to his eyes. It stirred emotions in him that he had thought long since dead. All he could say to himself was, Jesus Christ, where has she been? When the song ended, there was a long silence, and one of the women said, Fantastic. Whoever she is, don't let her get away. Louis Bonnet hurried out of the room into the broadcast studio. Teresa was getting ready to leave. I'm sorry I took so long. You see, I've never... Sit down, Maria. Teresa. Sorry. He took a deep breath. We do a musical radio broadcast every Saturday night. I know. I listen to it. How would you like to be on it? She stared at him, unable to believe what she was hearing. You mean you want to hire me? Beginning this week. The stage from which they broadcast was crowded with station personnel who had heard about the young girl with the incredible voice. Teresa's performance was superb. She was aware that she had never sung better, and who knew where this could lead? She might become famous and have men at her feet, begging her to marry them, as they begged Monique. Monday morning there was a long-distance telephone call for Teresa. It's probably somebody's idea of a joke, her father warned her. He says he's Jacques Remus, the most important stage director in France. Teresa picked up the telephone, wary. Hello? This is Jacques Remus. I'm staging a play at the Comédie Française, a musical. I start rehearsals next week. I've been searching for someone with a voice like yours. Who was your agent? Agent? I have no agent. Then I'll come up there and we'll work out a deal between us. I'll drive up to see you tomorrow. Monique saw to it that she was the first one downstairs when Jacques Remus arrived at the de Fossey villa that afternoon. He was greeted by a young girl so beautiful that his heart jumped. She was dressed in a simple white afternoon frock that set off her figure to perfection. My God, he thought, those looks and that voice. She's perfect. She's going to be an enormous star. I can't tell you how happy I am to meet you, Remus said. Monique smiled warmly. I'm very happy to meet you. I'm a big admirer of yours, Monsieur Remus. Good. We'll work well together. I brought a script with me. It's a beautiful love story, and I think... Teresa came into the room. She was wearing a new dress, but she looked awkward in it. She stopped as she saw Jacques Remus. He looked at Monique inquiringly. Oh, this is my sister, Monique said. Teresa. They both watched the expression on his face change. It went from shock to disappointment to disgust. You're the singer? Yes. He turned to Monique. And you're... Monique smiled innocently. I'm Teresa's sister. Remus turned to examine Teresa again and shook his head. I'm sorry, he said to Teresa. You're too... He fumbled for a word. You're too young. If you'll excuse me, I must get back to Paris. And they stood there watching him walk out the door. That was the last broadcast Teresa ever made. Louis Bonnet pleaded with her to come back, but the hurt was too deep. After that, Teresa would only sing in church, and she became more of a recluse than ever. While Monique went to Paris, Teresa stayed home and went to church every morning and prayed that her sister would find a handsome prince. And one day, the miracle occurred. A miracle because it was through Teresa that it happened. His name was Raoul Girardeau. He had gone to church on Sunday and heard Teresa sing. He had never heard anything like it. Early Monday morning, Teresa stopped in at the village general store to buy fabric for a dress she was making. Raoul Girardeau was working behind the counter. He looked up as Teresa walked in, and his face lit up. The voice! He was handsome and tall, with intelligent, flashing dark eyes and lovely, sensual lips. He was in his early 30s, a year or two older than Teresa. Teresa was so taken aback by his appearance that she could only stammer. "You should be singing professionally," Raoul told her. She remembered the expression on Rémou's face when he had seen her. No, she would never risk exposing herself publicly again. "Thank you," Teresa mumbled. "I haven't been to Ez before. It's a beautiful little town." "Yes," Teresa mumbled. "Were you born here?" "Yes." She felt like an idiot. "I'm 30 years old," she told herself, "and I'm acting like a silly schoolgirl. Stop it." But she could not stop it. What came out was, "Are you married?" He looked up at her with a warm smile on his face. "No," he said, "I haven't been that fortunate yet." "You are going to be," Teresa thought, "as soon as Monique returns from Paris." Monique was going to adore this man. They were perfect for each other. The following day, as Teresa was passing the shop, Raoul caught sight of her and hurried outside. "Good afternoon, mademoiselle. I was about to take a break. If you're free, would you care to join me for tea?" Yes, thank you." She was tongue-tied in his presence, and yet Raoul could not have been more pleasant. He did everything he could to put her at ease, and soon Teresa found herself telling this stranger things she had never told anyone before. They talked of loneliness. It was as though she were speaking to a mirror image. The hour melted away so quickly, and soon it was time for him to go back to work. As they rose, Raoul asked, "Will you join me for lunch tomorrow?" He was being kind, of course. Teresa knew that no man could ever be attracted to her, especially someone as wonderful as Raoul Girardeau. She was sure that he was kind to everyone. "I would enjoy that," Teresa said. Monique was returning from Paris the following day. Raoul would be Teresa's gift to her sister. Teresa was realistic enough to know that the Raouls of the world were not for her. She had had enough pain in her life. She had long since learned what was real and what was impossible. When Monique returned home the following day, Teresa hurried to greet her at the door. "I've invited someone to dinner tonight," Teresa said. I think you're going to like him." That evening at 7:30 promptly, the butler ushered Raoul Girardeau into the drawing room where Teresa, Monique, and their parents were waiting. "This is my mother and father, Monsieur Raoul Girardeau. How do you do?" Teresa took a deep breath. "And my sister, Monique. How do you do?" Monique's expression was polite, nothing more. Teresa looked at Raoul, expecting him to be stunned by Monique's beauty. Enchanted, merely courteous. Teresa stood there holding her breath, waiting for the sparks that she knew would start flying between them. But Raoul was looking at Teresa. "You look lovely tonight, Teresa." She blushed and stammered, "Thank you." Everything about that evening was topsy-turvy. Teresa's plan to bring Monique and Raoul together, to watch them get married, to have Raoul as a brother-in-law, none of it even began to happen. Incredibly, Raoul's attention was focused entirely on Teresa. It was like some impossible dream come true. When dinner was finished, Raoul said, "Your grounds look lovely." He turned to Teresa. "Would you show me the gardens?" "I would love to." Outside, Teresa could not let the subject drop. "How did you like Monique?" "She seems very nice," Raoul replied. "Ask me how I like her sister." and he took Teresa in his arms and kissed her. It was like nothing Teresa had ever experienced before. She trembled in his arms, and she thought, "Thank you, God. Oh, thank you." 4 weeks after Teresa had met him, Raoul proposed. "I'm sure you could have any man you want, Teresa," Raoul said, "but I would be honored if you chose me. Will you marry me?" And her look was answer enough. The wedding was set to take place the following Sunday in the village church. Monique, of course, was to be the maid of honor. At 5 o'clock Saturday afternoon, Teresa spoke to Raoul for the last time. At 12:30 Sunday, standing in the church vestry waiting for Raoul, who was 30 minutes late, Teresa was approached by the priest. He took her arm and led her aside, and she wondered at his agitation. Her heart began to pound. "What is it? Is something wrong? Has anything happened to Raoul?" "Oh, my dear," the priest said, "my poor dear Teresa." She was beginning to panic. "What is it, Father? Tell me." I just received word a moment ago. Raoul Giraudeau left town early this morning." "He what? Then some emergency must have come up to make him—" "He left with your sister. They were seen taking the train to Paris." The room began to whirl. No, Teresa thought, I mustn't faint. I mustn't embarrass God. She had only a hazy memory of the events that followed. From a far distance, she heard the priest make an announcement to the wedding party, and she dimly heard the uproar in the church. Teresa's mother put her arms around her daughter and said, "My poor Teresa, that your own sister could be so cruel. I'm so sorry." When they returned to the chateau, Teresa said quietly, "Please don't worry about me. I promise you that everything is going to be fine." Then she went up to her father's room, took out his razor, and slashed her wrists. Outwardly, Teresa seemed fine. Inwardly, she was sunk in an abyss of deep, desperate loneliness. Even when she was surrounded by people, she sat in a lonely chair, in a lonely room, in a lonely house, in a lonely world. A little over a year after Raoul had left Teresa, her father was packing to leave for Avila. "I have some business to transact there," he told Teresa, "but after that I'll be free. Why don't you come with me? Avila's a fascinating town. It will do you good to get away from here for a while." "No, thank you, Father." He looked at his wife and sighed. "Very well." The butler walked into the drawing room. "Excuse me, Mr. Foss, this letter just arrived for you." Even before Teresa opened it, she was filled with a prescience of something terrible looming before her. The letter read, "Teresa, my darling Teresa, God knows that I do not have a right to call you darling after the terrible thing I have done, but I promise to make it up to you if it takes me a lifetime. I don't know where to begin. Monique has run off and left me with our 2-month-old daughter. Frankly, I am relieved. I must confess that I have been in hell ever since the day I left you. I seem to have been caught up in some kind of magic spell of Monique's, but I knew from the beginning that my marriage to her was a terrible mistake. It was you I always loved. By the time you receive this letter, I will be on my way back to you. I love you, and I have always loved you, Teresa. I beg your forgiveness." She could not finish reading the letter. The thought of seeing Raoul again and his and Monique's baby was unthinkable, obscene. She threw the letter down, hysterical. "I must get out of here," Teresa screamed. "Tonight, now, please, please." It was impossible for them to calm her. "If Raoul is coming here," her father said, "you should at least talk to him." "No, if I see him, I'll kill him." She grabbed her father's arms, tears streaming down her face. "Take me with you to Avila," Teresa pleaded. The following morning in Avila, Teresa walked into the cool, vaulted church there, and almost immediately the old familiar feeling of peace stole over her. The last time she had been in church was to curse God. A feeling of deep shame filled her. It was her own weakness that had betrayed her, not God. "Forgive me," she whispered. "I have sinned. I have lived in hate. Help me. Please help me." She looked up and Father Berendo was standing there. When she finished, he led her into his office behind the vestry. "I don't know what to do, Father. I don't believe in anything anymore. I've lost faith." Her voice was filled with despair. "Did you have faith when you were a young girl?" "Yes, very much." "Then you still have it, my child. Faith is real and permanent. It is everything else that is transient." They talked that day for hours. Something that Father Berendo said triggered a deep response. "My child, if you do not believe in this world, then believe in the next world. Believe in the world where Jesus is waiting to receive you. There's a convent nearby, the convent of the Abbé Cistercian." He leaned forward. "Let me tell you about it. It is a world inside a world where everyone is dedicated to God. It is a place of peace and serenity." And Teresa's heart began to lift. "It sounds wonderful. I must caution you. It is one of the strictest orders in the world. Those who are admitted take a vow of chastity, silence, and obedience. No one who enters there ever leaves." The words sent a thrill through Teresa. "I will never want to leave. It is what I have been searching for, Father." The moment Teresa entered the convent, she knew. At last, she thought exultantly, at last. 3 days later, Teresa telephoned her mother and father. "I've been so worried," her mother said. "When are you coming home?" "I am home." Now, 30 years later, lying in the woods watching the sun come up over the horizon, Sister Teresa thought, "I came to the convent for all the wrong reasons. I was not running to God. I was running away from the world, but God read my heart." She was 60 years old, and the last 30 years of her life had been the happiest she had ever known. And now she had suddenly been flung back into the world she had run away from, and her mind was playing strange tricks on her. What does God have planned for me? For Sister Megan, the journey was an adventure. She had gotten used to the new sights and sounds that surrounded her, and the speed with which she had adapted surprised her. She found her companions fascinating. Amparo Giron was a powerful woman, easily able to keep up with the two men, and yet at the same time there was a strong femininity about her. Felix Carpio, the husky man with a reddish beard and a scar, seemed amiable and pleasant. But to Megan, the most compelling of the group was Jaime Miró. There was a relentless strength about him, an unshakable faith in his beliefs that reminded Megan of the nuns in the convent. It seemed to Megan that they had been walking forever, stumbling through the darkness, hit by branches, scratched by underbrush, attacked by insects, guided only by the light of the moon. Jaime took the sleeping bags and rolled them out. Felix Carpio said to Megan, "You take mine, sister. I'm used to sleeping on the ground." "Oh, it's yours," Megan said. "I couldn't—" "For Christ's sakes," Amparo snapped, "get in the bag. We don't want you to keep us up screaming about goddamn spiders." There was an animosity in her tone that Megan did not understand. Megan watched as Jaime unrolled his sleeping bag a few feet away from where she lay. He crawled into the bag. Amparo Giron crawled in beside him. Jaime looked over at Megan. "You'd better get some sleep," he said. "We have a long way ahead of us." Megan was awakened in the middle of the night by a moaning. It sounded as though someone were in terrible pain. Megan sat up, concerned. The sounds were coming from Jaime's sleeping bag. He must be terribly ill, was her first thought. And Megan's face flushed. She tried to close her ears to the obscene sounds she was hearing, but it was impossible. And she wondered what it would be like to have Jaime Miró make love to her. Instantly, Megan crossed herself and began to pray. "Forgive me, Father. Let my thoughts be filled only with you. Let my spirit seek you, that it may find its source and good in you." Megan missed the wonderful silence of the convent. To her own astonishment, she even missed the orphanage, the terrible, wonderful orphanage. Avila, Spain, 1957. They called her Megan the Terror. They called her Megan the Blue-Eyed Deaf.
This story is yours to enjoy absolutely free. Let's pause for a minute with some calming music. We'll continue shortly. Thank you for spending time with us.
I put the 8 in hate, go to ghost, the pence in repent. Put the men in anthem, on in far side. Put the champion, Cyan, Lucian, I'm in Vietnam, R-A-W. Oh, R-A-W. Take me back, take me back, take me back to it. Take me back, take me back.
They called her Megan the Impossible. She was 10 years old. She had been brought to the orphanage when she was an infant, left on the doorstep of a farmer and his wife who were unable to care for her. The orphanage was an austere, 2-story, whitewashed building on the outskirts of Avila, in the poorer section of the city. Megan was different from the other children, an alien with blonde hair and bright blue eyes, standing out in stark contrast to the dark-eyed, dark-haired children. But from the beginning, Megan was different in other ways. She was a fiercely independent child, a leader, a mischief maker. From time to time, the children would be called into the supervisor's office to meet a prospective foster parent. It was always a moment of great excitement for the children, for it would mean a chance to escape from the dreary routine of the orphanage, a chance to have a real home, to belong to someone. Megan's reputation preceded her. She would hear the prospective parents talk among themselves. Well, she's a very pretty child, but I hear she's difficult. Isn't she the one who smuggled 12 dogs into the orphanage last month? They had no idea how much the other children adored Megan. As Megan grew up, she became more and more devout. She was stirred by the intellectual aspects of the Catholic Church. She read St. Augustine's Confessions, the writings of St. Francis of Assisi, Thomas Merton, Moore, and a dozen others. Perhaps most of all, she loved the wonderful feelings of serenity that always stole over her in church. At 15, Megan had become a beautiful young woman with long blonde hair and a silky complexion that set her off even more from most of her companions. One day she was summoned to the office of Mercedes Angelis. Father Berendo was there. "Hello, Father." "Hello, my dear Megan." Mercedes Angelis said, "I'm afraid we have a problem, Megan." The headmistress went on, "There is an age limit here of 15, and you've reached your 15th birthday. Do I have to leave?" The kindly Amazon was upset, but she had no choice. "I'm afraid we must abide by the rules." Megan had no words. Father Berendo spoke. "Where would you like to go?" As she thought about it, an idea came to Megan. There was somewhere for her to go. From the time Megan was 12 years old, she had helped earn her keep at the orphanage by making outside deliveries in town, and many of them were made to the convent of the Abbé Cistercian. They were always delivered to the Reverend Mother Bettina. Megan had sneaked glimpses of the nuns praying or walking through the halls, and she had sensed an almost overpowering feeling of serenity. She envied the joy that the nuns seemed to radiate. To Megan, the convent seemed a house of love. The Reverend Mother had taken a liking to the bright young girl, and they had had long talks over the years. "Why do people join convents?" Megan had asked. People come to us for many reasons. Most come to dedicate themselves to God, but some come because they have no hope. Some come because they are running away. Others come here because they are alienated and they want to belong." That was what had struck a responsive chord in the young girl. "I've never really belonged to anyone," Megan thought. "This is my chance. I think I would like to join the convent." 6 weeks later, Megan took her vows. And finally, Megan had found what she had been searching for so long. She belonged. These were her sisters, the family she had never had, and they were all one under their father. But from time to time, Megan could not help wondering who her parents were, why she had been abandoned by them. I'll never know, Megan thought. Colonel Ramon Akoko was in an expansive mood. All the pieces were finally falling into place. An orderly came into the office. "Colonel Costello has arrived." "Yes." Akoko waved him to a chair. "Sit down. I have some news for you. Jaime Miro has the nuns." "What?" "Yes. They're traveling with Miro and his men. He split them up into 3 groups. "Do you know where Miro is headed?" Colonel Costello asked. "He's traveling north. I will catch him within the next 3 days." Colonel Costello was gaping at him, stunned. "How?" "One of Miro's terrorists," Colonel Akoko said, "is an informant." The reporters gathered outside the gray facade of New York's Waldorf Astoria Hotel and watched the parade of celebrities in evening dress alight from their limousines and head for the grand ballroom. They had come from around the world to celebrate the 60th birthday of Ellen Scott, head of Scott Industries. 25 years earlier, Ellen's brother-in-law, Byron, had died in an aeroplane crash in Spain, along with his wife and infant daughter. Now, in the ballroom of the Waldorf, the governor of New York was praising Ellen Scott. "Ellen Scott is much more than just a brilliant woman. She is a charitable, compassionate human being who never hesitates to get involved in the problems that face the world today." Ellen was no longer listening. How wrong he is, she thought. Scott Industries isn't even my company. Milo and I stole it, and I'm guilty of a greater crime than that. After the banquet that night, the ghosts of the past returned. The company belongs to the Scott family, she thought. I'm not going to turn it over to strangers. And that led her thoughts to Byron's daughter, the rightful heiress to the throne that had been stolen from her. I must find her, Ellen Scott thought. The following morning, Ellen Scott sent for Alan Tucker, chief of security for Scott Industries. He was a former detective in his 40s, a thin, balding man. I want you to go on a mission for me, Ellen Scott told him. 28 years ago, an orphan was left on the doorstep of a farmhouse outside of Avila, Spain. I want you to find out where she is today and bring her back to me as quickly as possible. Yes, ma'am. Do you happen to know her name? Patricia. Her name is Patricia. Rubio, Tomas, and the 2 sisters avoided the large cities and took side roads, passing old stone villages with grazing sheep and goats, and shepherds listening to music and soccer games on their transistor radios. It was a colorful juxtaposition of the past and the present. They passed farms of wheat and olive trees and vines and maize, and they foraged for potatoes and lettuce and took fruit from the trees and eggs and chickens from the hen coops. The whole countryside of Spain is a huge market, said Rubio Arzeno. Sister Teresa was totally oblivious to her surroundings. Her only thought was to reach the convent at Mendavia with a precious gold cross. Rubio Arzeno had attempted to strike up a conversation with Sister Teresa, trying to make her feel at ease. It must seem strange to you being out in the world again, sister. How long were you in the convent? Why did he want to know? 30 years. My, that's a long time. Where are you from? It was painful for her even to say the word. Ez. His face brightened. Ez? I spent a summer there once on a holiday. It's a lovely town. I know it well. I remember... I know it well? How well? Did he know Raoul? Had Raoul sent him? and the truth hit her like a bolt of lightning. These strangers had been sent to bring her back to Ez, to Raul Girardot. They were kidnapping her. God was punishing her for deserting Monique's baby. That was 30 years ago, Teresa muttered to herself. Rubio Arzana was watching her, listening to her mumbling. Is something wrong, sister? She was on to them now. She was not going to let them take her back to Raul and the baby. She had to get to the convent at Mendavia, and then God would forgive her for the terrible sin she had committed. I must be clever. I must not let them know I am on to their secret. She looked up at Rubio Arzano. I am fine, Sister Teresa said. It was dusk when they saw the town of Olmedo in the distance. Rubio stopped. There will be soldiers there. Let's move up to the hills and skirt the city. They moved off the road and left the plains, headed for the hills above Olmedo. The sun was skipping across the mountain tops, and the sky was beginning to darken. They reached the top of a high ridge when Thomas Sanjuro suddenly held up a hand. Hold it, he whispered. Rubio Arzana walked to his side, and they moved to the edge of the ridge and looked down into the valley below. There was an encampment of soldiers there. Mierda, Rubio whispered. He turned to Lucia and Sister Teresa, trying not to show how worried he was. We'll spend the night here, sisters. We must be very quiet. To Sister Teresa, the news had a special meaning. She had heard the men say that someone named Colonel Akoka was searching for them. They called Colonel Akoka the enemy, but these men are the enemy, so Colonel Akoka must be my friend. Oh, thank you, dear God, for sending me Colonel Akoka. She knew what she must do. At 4 o'clock in the morning, Sister Teresa rose. She hesitated, thinking about the cross. Should I carry it with me? But I'll be coming back here soon. Silently, she moved over to where Lucia slept and placed the cross in her sleeping bag. Then Teresa turned and moved into the woods and carefully began to make her way downhill toward the soldiers' camp. The hill was steep and slippery with dew, but God gave her wings, and she sped downhill without stumbling or falling, hurrying toward her salvation. In the darkness ahead, the figure of a man suddenly materialized. A voice called out, "Who goes there?" Sister Teresa. She approached the sentry. He wore an army uniform and was carrying a rifle pointed at her. I am Sister Teresa from the Abbey Cistercian. I have been taken prisoner by Jaime Moreau and his men. She watched the stunned expression that came over his face. Colonel Costello stared at her unbelievingly. All of his energies for the last 3 days had been focused on finding Jaime Moreau and the nuns, and now, here in front of him, was one of them. There was a God. Sister Teresa said, "We must hurry. They are trying to take me back to Ez." "Who's trying to take you back to Ez?" "The men of Jaime Moreau." He got to his feet. "Sister, do you by any chance happen to know where these men are?" Sister Teresa said impatiently, "Of course." She turned and pointed. "They're up in those hills hiding from you." When Lucia awakened, the gold cross was miraculously at her side. "It's my ticket to Switzerland," she thought excitedly. "I'm getting out of here." She crept out of the sleeping bag and looked over to where Sister Teresa had slept. She was gone. Lucia moved to the edge of the clearing, bending low so she would not be seen. And at that instant, all hell broke loose. Colonel Costello had given specific orders to his men. "Don't take any prisoners. You're dealing with terrorists. Shoot to kill." When his men were in position, Colonel Costello shouted for the sake of the record, "Put down your arms. You're surrounded." And in the same breath he called out the command, "Fire! Keep firing!" A dozen automatic weapons began spraying the clearing. Thomas Sanjuro never had a chance. A hail of machine gun bullets caught him in the chest, and he was dead before he hit the ground. Rubio Arzana was at the far edge of the clearing when the firing started. It was pitch black in the clearing, and the soldiers were firing blindly. He knew that if he returned their fire, he would give his position away. He saw Lucia crouched 2 feet away from him. "Stay low," Rubio told her. He grabbed Lucia's hand and zigzagged toward the forest. Shots whizzed dangerously close as they ran, but moments later, Lucia and Rubio were among the trees. "Hold on to me, sister," he said. They heard the sound of their attackers behind them, but gradually it died away. It was impossible to pursue anyone through the inky blackness of the woods. Lucia and Rubio Arzano kept moving through the woods, stumbling and slipping, attacked by tree limbs and bushes and insects, but each step took them farther away from their pursuers. Finally, Rubio Arzano said, "We can stop here. They won't find us." Lucia lay down on the ground, fighting to catch her breath. In her mind, she replayed the terrible scenes she had witnessed earlier. Thomas shot down without warning, and the bastards intended to murder us all, Lucia thought. The only reason she was still alive was because of the man sitting beside her. He took out a pack of Ducados cigarettes, the heavy black tobacco of Spain. "I hope it won't offend you if I smoke, sister." "No," Lucia said. "Please, go ahead." She watched him light up, and the moment the smoke reached her nostrils, she was desperate to have a cigarette. "Do you mind if I try one?" He looked at her in surprise. "You wish to try a cigarette?" "Oh, just to see what it's like," Lucia said quickly. "Oh, of course." He held the pack toward her. She took out a cigarette, put it between her lips, and he lit the end of it for her. Lucia inhaled deeply, and as the smoke filled her lungs, she felt wonderful. Rubio was watching her, puzzled. Lucia coughed. "So that's what a cigarette tastes like. Did you like it?" "Not really," but she took another deep, satisfying puff. God, how she had missed this. But she knew she had to be careful. She did not want to make him suspicious. She put out the cigarette she had held clumsily in her fingers. She had been in the convent for only a few months, and yet Rubio was right. It did seem strange to be out in the world again. Colonel Ramon Acoca arrived at the camp where they were holding Sister Teresa. With him were a dozen of his men from the GEO. "Bring the nun to me," Colonel Acoca ordered. Sister Teresa was too nervous to sit. "You must help me." "We're going to help each other," the colonel assured her. "God brought me here," Colonel Acoca said patiently. "Along with God, did some men also bring you here, sister?" "Yes, they kidnapped me. I had to escape from them." "You told Colonel Costello where he could find those men?" "Yes, the evil ones. Raoul is behind it all, you see. He sent me a letter and said—" "Sister, the man we're looking for in particular is Jaime Moreau. Have you seen him?" She shivered. "Yes. Oh, yes. He—" The colonel leaned forward. "Excellent. Now you must tell me where I can find him." "He and the others are on their way to Aix." The colonel frowned, puzzled. "To Aix? To France?" "Yes, Monique deserted Raoul, and he sent the men to kidnap me because of the baby, so—" He tried to control his growing impatience. "Moreau and his men are headed north. Aix is to the east. You must not let them take me back to Raoul." Colonel Acoca said curtly, "I don't give a damn about Raoul. I want to know where I can find Jaime Moreau." "I told you. He is in Aix waiting for me." "You're lying." "I think you're trying to protect Moreau." "Now, I don't want to hurt you, so I'm going to ask you once more. Where is Jaime Moreau?" Sister Teresa stared at him helplessly. "I don't know," she whispered. The colonel turned to Patricio Arrieta's lieutenant. "The sister's memory needs prodding. Take her to the quartermaster's tent. Perhaps you and your men can help her remember where Jaime Moreau is. We'll see if we can't refresh your memory for you." Half a dozen of Acoco's men had entered the tent, along with some of Costello's uniformed soldiers. Sister Teresa looked up. "Are these men going to take me to the convent now?" "They're going to do better than that," Patricio Arrieta grinned. "They're going to take you to heaven, sister." The men moved closer to her, surrounding her. "That's a pretty dress you're wearing," a soldier said. "Are you sure you're a nun, darling?" One of the men pushed Teresa down on the cot. "You're no beauty, but Let's see what you look like underneath all those clothes." He reached down and ripped off the top of her dress while another man tore at her skirt. Teresa screamed. She looked up at the circle of men surrounding her. "God will strike them all dead. He will not let them touch me, for I am his vessel. I am one with the Lord, drinking from his fountain of purity." One of the soldiers unfastened his belt. An instant later, she felt rough hands pushing her legs apart, and as the soldier sprawled on top of her, she screamed again, "Now, God, punish them now!" She waited for the clap of thunder, the bright flash of lightning that would destroy them all. Nothing happened. Another soldier climbed on top of her, and a red haze came over her eyes. Teresa lay there, waiting for God to strike, almost unaware of the men who were ravaging her. She no longer felt the pain. Suddenly the red haze lifted from Sister Teresa's eyes, and she got a clear look at her surroundings for the first time. There were at least a dozen soldiers in the tent, waiting their turn to rape her. Lieutenant Arrieta was standing at one side of the bed watching. The soldiers in line were in full uniform, not bothering to undress. And Teresa suddenly realized, there is no God, but there is a Satan, and these are his helpers, and they must die, all of them. As the next soldier plunged into her, Sister Teresa grabbed the pistol from his holster, and before anyone could react, she turned the pistol on Arrieta. The bullet hit him in the throat. Sister Teresa pointed the gun at the other soldiers and kept firing. 4 of them fell to the floor dead before the others came to their senses and began shooting at her. Because of the soldier on top of her, they had difficulty aiming. Sister Teresa and her last ravisher died at the same moment. Jaime Moreau came awake instantly, aroused by a movement at the edge of the clearing. He slipped out of the sleeping bag and rose, gun in hand. He saw Megan on her knees praying. He stood there studying her. There was an unearthly beauty about the image of this lovely woman praying in the forest in the middle of the night, and Jaime found himself resenting it. It wasn't her fault that the church had stood idly by while Franco's phalangists tortured and raped and murdered Basques and Catalans. It wasn't her fault, Jaime told himself, that my family was among the victims. 30 miles to the east, in a wooded area along the way to Penafiel, Lucia Carmine was asleep. Rubio Arzano sat watching her, reluctant to awaken her. She sleeps like an angel, he thought. Rubio leaned over and whispered gently in her ear, "Sister Lucia, it is time for us to go." 5 minutes later they were on their way. They heard the sound of the falls half an hour before they reached them. The Penafiel Falls was a beautiful sight, cascading down into the swift-moving river. The roar of it was almost deafening. "I want to bathe," Lucia said. It seemed years since she had last had a bath. Rubio Arzano stared at her. "Here?" "No, you idiot, in Rome." "Yes." "Well, be careful. The river is swollen because of the rain." "Don't worry." She stood there patiently waiting. I will go away while you undress." "Stay nearby," Lucia said quickly. There were probably wild animals in the woods. As Lucia started to undress, Rubio hastily walked a few yards away and turned his back. "Don't go in too far, sister," he called. "The river is treacherous." The cool morning air felt wonderful on her naked body. It was cold and invigorating. She turned and saw that Rubio was steadfastly looking in the other direction. She stepped in deeper, avoiding the rocks that were all around, and splashed the water over herself, feeling the rushing river tugging hard at her legs. A few feet away, a small tree was being swept downstream. As Lucia turned to watch it, she suddenly lost her balance and slipped, screaming. She fell hard, slamming her head against a boulder. Rubio Arzano watched in horror as Lucia disappeared under the rushing waters and was swept downstream. In a split second, he turned to race along the riverbank, leaping over small logs and bushes. At the first bend of the river, he caught a glimpse of Lucia's body coming toward him. Diving in, he swam frantically to reach her, struggling against the powerful current. It was almost impossible. He felt himself being pulled away. Lucia was 10 feet from him, but it seemed like miles. He made one last heroic effort and grabbed her arm, his fingers almost slipping away. He held her in a death grip as he began grappling his way to the safety of the shore. When Rubio finally reached the riverbank, he pulled Lucia up on the grass, and he lay there, fighting for breath. Lucia was unconscious. Rubio turned her over on her stomach, straddled her, and began applying pressure against her lungs. A minute went by, then 2, and just as he was beginning to despair, a stream of water gushed out of her mouth, and she groaned. Rubio uttered a prayer of thanks. He kept up the pressure, gentler now, until her heartbeat was steady. She began to shiver from the cold. Rubio hurried over to a clump of trees and pulled down handfuls of leaves. He carried them over to her and started to dry her body with them. He was wet and cold, and his clothes were soaked, but he paid no attention. He had been panicky with fear that Sister Lucia would die. Now, as he gently rubbed her naked body with the dry leaves, unworthy thoughts came into his mind. She has the body of a goddess. Oh, forgive me, Lord. She belongs to you, and I must not think these wicked thoughts. Lucia was gradually awakened by the gentle stroking of her body. Oh, yes, don't stop, Quero. She was aroused before she even opened her eyes. When Lucia had fallen into the river, her last thought had been that she was going to die. But she was alive, and she found herself looking up at the man who had saved her. Without thinking, Lucia reached out and pulled Rubio down to her. There was a look of shocked surprise on his face. "Sister," he protested, "we can't." Her lips were on his, fierce and hungry and demanding, and her tongue was exploring his mouth. It was too much for Rubio. "Hurry," Lucia whispered, "hurry." She watched as Rubio nervously stripped off his wet clothes. He deserves a reward, Lucia thought. So do I. She felt him joining his body to hers in a timeless, mindless ritual, and she gave herself up to the glorious sensations that flooded her. It was all the sweeter because of her close brush with death. Rubio was a surprisingly good lover, both gentle and fierce at the same time. He had a vulnerability that took Lucia completely by surprise, and there was a look of such tenderness in his eyes that Lucia felt a sudden lump in her throat. I hope the big oaf isn't falling in love with me. There was something so touching and earnest about him. He doesn't know how to play games, she thought. I must be careful not to hurt him. I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy, he said. We will have many children, and the girls will all look like you. I can't let him go on like this, Lucia decided. I should stop him now. But somehow she could not bring herself to do it. She listened to Rubio paint romantic pictures of their life together, and she found herself almost wishing it could happen. In the distance, the walls and buildings of Arando de Duero loomed before them like a man-made mountain hewn out of the earth. There will be a pawn shop there, Lucia thought. I'll get enough for the cross to take me to Switzerland. The two of them crossed the long bridge that led to the main street, Avenido Castilla, and headed for the center of town. To Lucia's relief, they passed a pawn shop. I'll come back to it, she decided. There was a police station next to it. Lucia shuddered. They passed the Taverna Cueva with its long bar and wooden tables. There was a jukebox inside, and hanging from the oak beam ceilings were hams and strings of garlic. I'm hungry, Lucia said. Rubio took Lucia's arm and led her inside. I'm going to kill her, Ricardo Mulatto thought. I could strangle her with my bare hands, throw her off the mountain, or simply shoot her. No, I think strangling her would give me the greatest pleasure. Sister Graciela was the most exasperating human being he had ever encountered. She was impossible. In the beginning, When Jaime Moreau had assigned him to escort her, Ricardo Mulatto had been pleased. True, she was a nun, but she was also the most ravishing beauty he had ever laid eyes on. He was determined to get to know her, to find out why she had decided to lock up all that exquisite beauty behind convent walls for the rest of her life. Under the skirt and blouse she was wearing, he could discern the rich, nubile curves of a woman. It's going to be a very interesting trip, Ricardo decided. The problem was that Sister Graciela refused to speak to him. She had not said one word since their journey began, and what completely baffled Ricardo was that she did not appear to be angry or frightened or upset. They traveled at a good pace, walking along hot, dusty side roads, past fields of wheat, rippling golden in the sunlight, and fields of barley. When they crossed the Rio Moros, Ricardo asked, "Would you like to rest a while, sister?" Silence. "We will be at Segovia soon, sister." No reaction. What could I have done to offend her? "Are you hungry, sister?" Nothing. This one was made of stone, with no chisel hard enough to penetrate that cold exterior. In spite of Graciela's sullen behavior, Ricardo felt a lump in his throat every time he looked at her, and he cursed himself for a romantic fool. "You won't have to put up with my company much longer," Ricardo assured her. "In 2 days we will be in Logrono. You'll meet your friends there, and you'll be on your way to the convent at Mendavia." No reaction. He could have been talking to a stone wall.
This audiobook is completely free for you. Take a moment to breathe, enjoy a bit of relaxing music, and then we'll continue the story. Thank you for watching.
Honey, make me become true. Honey, make me come to you. It's the last thing that I do. Honey, make me become true. Honey, make me come to you. If it's the last I do, I feel alive in your arms. Though it feels like a dream, I'll be wherever you are, as long as you...
I am talking to a stone wall. As they started up the steep mountain path, Graciela slipped on some loose pebbles, and Ricardo instinctively reached out to help her. She jerked away from his hand and righted herself. "Fine," he thought angrily, "break your neck." Because of the altitude, it was getting more difficult to breathe. The path grew steeper. As they rounded a bend, they came upon an empty eagle's nest. By dusk, they had reached the rugged area known as the Boca de Asno, the mouth of the donkey. There were orange stakes 10 feet tall along the trail, marking the height of the snow in winter. They were near Aguila, famous for its caves. After that, Ricardo knew that the trail would start downward. From now on, Ricardo thought, it will be easy. The worst is over. Ricardo heard a faint buzzing sound overhead. He looked up, searching for the source of it. An army plane suddenly appeared over the top of the mountain, flying toward them. "Down!" Ricardo shouted. "Down!" Graciela kept walking. The plane circled and began to swoop lower. "Get down!" Ricardo yelled again. He jumped on Graciela and pushed her down to the ground, his body on top of hers. What happened next took him completely by surprise. Without any warning, Graciela began yelling hysterically, fighting him. She was kicking him in the groin, clawing at his face, trying to rip at his eyes. But the most astonishing thing was what she was saying. She was screaming out a string of obscenities that sent Ricardo into shock. He could not believe that these words were coming from that beautiful, innocent mouth. He tried to grab her hands to protect himself from her raking nails. She was like a wildcat under him. He held her down until her frantic struggling finally ceased. Strange, strangled sounds were coming from her, and Ricardo realized that she was sobbing. He, with all his experience with women, was completely baffled. He was straddled atop a hysterical nun who had the vocabulary of a wounded truck driver, and he had no notion of what to do next. "Sister, we have to find a place to hide quickly. The plane will have reported us, and in a few hours there will be soldiers swarming all over the place. If you ever want to reach the convent, you'll get up and come with me." He waited a moment, then carefully raised himself off her and sat alongside her until the sobs subsided. Finally, Graciela sat up. Her face was smudged from the dirt. Her hair was mussed. Her eyes were red from crying, and yet her beauty made Ricardo ache. "There are dozens of caves around here," Ricardo told her. "We'll hide in one of them for the night. By dawn we can be on our way again." In spite of what had happened, he felt a defenselessness about her, a fragility that touched him, that made him want to say something to reassure her. The Cuevas del Aguila have been carved out by eons of winds and floods and earthquakes, and they come in an infinite variety. Some of the caves are mere indentations in the mountain rocks. Others are endless tunnels, never explored by man. A mile from where they had spotted the plane, Ricardo found a cave that was to his satisfaction. The low entrance was almost covered by underbrush. "Stay here," he said. He ducked into the entrance and walked into the cave. It was dark inside, with only faint light spilling through the opening. "I'll go gather some branches to cover up the mouth of the cave. I'll be back in a few minutes." Inside the cave, Graciela watched him leave. She sank to the cold ground in despair. "I can't stand any more," she thought. "Where are you, Jesus? Please release me from this hell." And it had been hell. From the beginning, Graciela had been fighting the attraction she felt toward Ricardo. She thought of the Moor. "I'm afraid of myself, of the evil in me. I want this man, and I must not." And so she had built a barrier of silence between them, the silence she had lived with in the convent. But now, without the discipline of the convent, Graciela found herself unable to banish her inner darkness. She had spent years fighting the urges of her body, fighting the remembered sounds, the moans and sighs that came from her mother's bed. The first time Graciela had looked at Ricardo Mulatto, the past had come flooding back. He was handsome and gentle and kind. When Graciela was a little girl, she had dreamed of someone like Ricardo, and when he was near her, when he touched her, her body was instantly aflame, and she was filled with a deep shame. "I am the bride of Christ, and my thoughts are a betrayal of God. I belong to you, Jesus. Please help me now. Cleanse my mind of impure thoughts." It was her own deep desire she was fighting. She was torn between her spirit and the cravings of her flesh. "I must not give in. I must get back to the convent." Graciela heard a low mewing from the back of the cave, and she quickly turned. There were 4 green eyes staring at her in the dark, moving toward her. Graciela's heart began to beat faster. 2 baby wolf cubs trotted up to her on soft padded feet, rubbing their heads against her. She smiled and began to gently stroke them. There was a sudden rustle from the entrance of the cave. "Ricardo is back," she thought. The next instant, an enormous gray wolf was flying at her throat. Lucia Carmine sat in the taverno in Arando de Duero and took a deep breath. Rubio sat there looking into her eyes, holding her hand, and there was such an intense feeling of love coming from him that Lucia felt uneasy. Doesn't he know it could never work? No, because I haven't had the courage to tell him. He's not in love with me. He's in love with the woman he thinks I am. He'll be much better off without me. "Excuse me," Lucia said. "I'll be back in a moment." And she was on her way to the pawn shop. The owner was a small man, barely visible over the counter. His eyes were cold and hard, but they lit up when he saw the glittering gold cross. I will give you 200,000 pesetas for it, he said. There is a condition, Lucia told him. My passport was stolen. I need a new one. I see. If you can help me with my problem, the cross is yours. He nodded. You shall have it. Come back at 8 o'clock. I've done it, Lucia thought. I'm free. Clutching the cross, she hurried back to the cafe where Rubio was waiting. Seated next to Rubio, Lucia looked around the room for the first time. It was filled with locals. Most of them seemed to be staring at the two strangers. One of the young men in the cafe started to sing a song praising Franco, and the others joined in. A man walked over to the table where Lucia and Rubio were sitting. You're not singing, senor. Join us. You are against Franco, senor? Lucia saw Rubio's fists clench. Oh, God, not now. He mustn't start anything that will attract attention. She said to him warningly, Rubio, and thank God he understood. He looked up at the young man and said pleasantly, I have nothing against Franco. I just don't know the words. Ah, then we'll all hum the song together. They stood there waiting for Rubio to refuse. Rubio glanced at Lucia. Bueno. The men began to sing again, and Rubio hummed loudly. When the song ended, a man slapped Rubio on the back. Not bad, old man. Not bad at all. One of the men said, What's that package you're holding? His companion said, I'll bet she's got something better than that up her skirt. Rubio sprang to his feet and grabbed one of the men by the throat. He punched him so hard that he flew across the room, breaking a table. No, Lucia screamed, don't! But it was too late. In an instant, it became a free-for-all, with everybody eagerly joining in and drunken men wrestling on the floor. A wine bottle shattered the glass behind the bar. Chairs and tables were knocked over as men went flying through the air. Rubio knocked down two men, and a third ran toward him and hit him in the stomach. He gave a grunt of pain. Rubio, let's get out of here, Lucia screamed. He nodded. He was clutching his stomach. They pushed their way through the melee and found themselves outside on the street. They turned down Calle Santa Maria, and the noises of the fight behind them gradually diminished. 2 blocks away, they came to a large church. Lucia ran up the steps, opened the door, and peered inside. The church was deserted. We'll be safe in here, she said. They walked into the dimness of the church. Rubio let his hand fall away from his stomach, and blood came gushing out. Lucia felt sick. My God, what happened? A knife, Rubio whispered. He used a knife. He slumped to the floor. Lucia knelt at his side, panicky. Don't move. She removed his shirt and pressed it against his stomach, trying to stem the flow of blood. Rubio's face was chalk white. You shouldn't have fought them, you idiot, Lucia said angrily. His voice was a slurred whisper. I could not let them speak to you that way. Lucia was touched as she had never been touched before. She stood there staring at him and thought, how many times has this man risked his life for me? I won't let you die, she said fiercely. I'm not going to let you die. She found water and towels in the priest's changing room in the rear of the church, and she bathed Rubio's wound. His face was hot to the touch, and his body was soaked in perspiration. Lucia put cold towels on his forehead. Rubio's eyes were closed, and he seemed to be asleep. Lucia cradled his head in her arms and talked to him. It did not matter what she said. She was talking to keep him alive, forcing him to hold on to the thin thread of his existence. She babbled on, afraid to stop for even a second. We'll work your farm together, Rubio. I want to meet your mother and sisters. Do you think they'll like me? I want them to so much. She spent the afternoon talking to him, bathing his fevered body, changing the dressing. The bleeding had almost stopped. You see, Caro, you're getting better. You're going to be well. I told you. You and I will have such a wonderful life together, Rubio. Only please don't die. Please. She found that she was weeping. His body was soaked with perspiration again, and his breathing was shallow and rasping. She rose and took a long, last look at him. I can't help him, she thought. I have to think of myself. The pawnbroker is waiting for me with my passport." Her eyes filled with tears. She stumbled out into the street and began to walk rapidly. Ahead, she could see the lights on in the pawn shop. She began walking faster, then running. She crossed the street and burst through the open door. Inside the police station, a uniformed officer was behind the desk. He looked up as Lucia appeared. Lucia cried, "A man has been stabbed. He may be dying." The policeman did not ask questions. He picked up a telephone and spoke into it. 2 detectives appeared almost immediately. "Someone has been stabbed, Senorita?" "Yes. Please, follow me. Hurry." "We'll pick up the doctor on the way," one of the detectives said. "Then you can take us to your friend." When they entered the church, the doctor walked over to the still figure on the floor and knelt beside him. A moment later he looked up. "He's alive, but barely. I'll call for an ambulance." Lucia sank to her knees and said silently, "Thank you, God." One of the detectives had been staring at Lucia all the way to the church. "Excuse me, Senorita. Would you be good enough to come back to the station with us? We have a few questions we wish to ask you." Ricardo Mulatto was a short distance away from the mountain cave when suddenly he saw a large gray wolf trotting toward the entrance. He froze for a single instant, then moved as he had never moved in his life. He raced toward the mouth of the cave and burst through the entrance. "Sister!" In the dim light, he saw the huge gray shape leaping toward Graciela. Instinctively, Ricardo reached for his pistol and fired. The wolf let out a yelp of pain and turned toward Ricardo. He felt the sharp fangs of the wounded beast tearing at his clothing, and he smelled the animal's fetid breath. The wolf was stronger than he had expected. Ricardo tried to fight free, but it was impossible. He felt himself beginning to lose consciousness. He was dimly aware of Graciela coming toward him, and he called, "Get away!" He saw Graciela's hand raised above his head, and as it started to descend toward him, he glimpsed a huge rock in it, and he thought, "She's going to kill me." An instant later, the rock swept past him and smashed into the wolf's skull. There was a last savage gasp, and the animal lay still on the ground. Ricardo was huddled on the floor, fighting for breath. Graciela knelt at his side. "Are you all right?" Her voice was trembling with concern. Ricardo managed to nod. Then he rose with difficulty. They staggered out into the clean mountain air, shaken. Ricardo stood there taking deep, lung-filling breaths until his head cleared. With no bandages or antiseptic, they cleaned the scratches as best they could, bathing them in the clean, cold spring water. Ricardo's arm was so stiff that he had trouble moving it. To his surprise, Graciela said, "Let me do it." He was even more surprised by the gentleness with which she did the task. Without warning, Graciela began trembling violently in an aftermath of shock. "It's all right," Ricardo said. "It's all over." She could not stop shaking. Ricardo took her in his arms and said soothingly, "There's nothing more to fear." He was holding her closely, and he could feel her thighs pressing against his body, and her soft lips were on his, and she was holding him close, whispering things he could not understand. It was as though he had known Graciela always, and yet he knew nothing about her, except that she's God's miracle, he thought. Graciela was also thinking of God. "Thank you, God, for this joy. Thank you for finally letting me feel what love is." It had been an experience for which she had no words, beyond anything she had ever imagined. Ricardo was watching her, and her beauty still took his breath away. She belongs to me now, Ricardo thought. She doesn't have to go back to a convent. We'll get married and have beautiful children, strong sons. "I love you," he said. "I'll never let you go, Graciela." "Ricardo, darling, I want to marry you. Will you marry me?" And without even thinking, Graciela said, "Yes, oh yes." And she was in his arms again, and she thought, "This is what I wanted and thought I would never have." Ricardo was saying, "We'll live in France for a while where we'll be safe. This fight will be over soon, and we'll return to Spain. I have so much to make up to you." He held her very close. And suddenly, Graciela thought of the soldiers who were hunting them. and she wondered if she and her beloved Ricardo were going to live long enough to have a future together. Alan Tucker arrived in Avila the day after his conversation with Ellen Scott. He checked into the Cuatro Postes Hotel and said to the clerk behind the desk, "Is there a newspaper office around here?" "Down the street, senor. To your left, 2 blocks." Tucker found the newspaper office, and inside he approached one of the half a dozen people working behind desks. "Perdón, I would like to see the managing editor." The man pointed to an office. "In there, senor." Tucker walked over to the door. A man in his mid-30s was seated behind a desk, busily editing copy. "Could I speak with you a moment? I'm looking for a senorita." The editor smiled. "Aren't we all, senor?" "She was left at a farmhouse around here when she was an infant." "Oh, and you are trying to find her?" "Yes." "How many years ago would that be, senor?" 28. The man shrugged. "It was before my time. I would suggest you speak with Father Berendo." Father Berendo sat in his study listening to the stranger. When Alan Tucker was through talking, Father Berendo said, "Why do you wish to know about this matter, senor? It happened so long ago." Tucker hesitated. "I am not at liberty to say. I can only assure you that I mean the woman no harm." When Father Berendo had taken the infant to the orphanage, Mercedes Angeles, who ran the place, had asked, "Does the baby have a name?" "I don't know." "Well, we'll just have to give her a name, won't we?" She had recently finished reading a romantic novel, and she liked the name of the heroine in it. "Megan," she said. "We'll call her Megan." And 14 years later, Father Berendo had taken Megan from the orphanage to the convent. And now, so many years after that, this stranger was looking for her. Life always comes full circle, Father Berendo thought. "Sit down, senor," Father Berendo said to Alan Tucker. "There is much to tell you." And he told him. When the priest had finished, Alan Tucker sat there quietly, his mind racing. "Father, I'd like to get into the convent to see her. It's very important." The priest shook his head. "I'm afraid you are too late. The convent has been attacked by agents of the government." Alan Tucker stared at him. "Attacked? What happened to the nuns?" "4 of the nuns escaped. Sister Megan was one of them." Things were beginning to become complicated. "Where is she now?" "No one knows. The police and the army are searching for her and the other sisters." "I see." There was nothing Alan Tucker could do but wait for further developments. Jaime Moreau found himself intrigued with Sister Megan. She was not behaving at all as he would have expected a nun to behave. She was miles away from her convent, traveling through strange territory, being hunted, and she seemed to be actually enjoying it. What kind of nun is she, Jaime Moreau wondered. Amparo Giron was less impressed. "I'll be glad to be rid of her," she thought. She stayed close to Jaime, letting the nun walk with Felix Carpio. Amparo seemed to Megan like a wild animal, gliding effortlessly over hills and valleys, never seeming to tire. When finally, hours later, Valladolid loomed up in the distance, Jaime called a halt. Jaime turned to Felix. "Everything is arranged?" "Yes." Megan wondered exactly what had been arranged. She found out very quickly. "Tomas is instructed to contact us in front of the bull ring." "What time does the bank close?" 5 o'clock. There will be plenty of time. Jaime nodded. "And today there should be a fat payroll." "Good Lord, they're going to rob a bank," Megan thought. It was a little more excitement than she had bargained for. God isn't going to like this. As they approached the entrance to a huge arena, they passed a poster plastered to the wall. Megan stopped and stared at it. There was a picture of Jaime Moreau, and under it, "Wanted for murder. Jaime Moreau, 500,000 pesetas reward for his capture, dead or alive." And suddenly it brought back to Megan the sober realization of the kind of man she was traveling with, the terrorist who held her life in his hands. Jaime was studying the picture. Not a bad likeness. He ripped off the poster, folded it, and put it in his pocket. What good will that do, Amparo wondered. They must have posted hundreds of those. Jaime grinned. This particular one is going to bring us a fortune, querida. Aproned food vendors were calling out their wares. One of them approached Jaime. Empanadas, he called out. Empanadas caliente? Jaime raised a hand. Aquí. The vendor skillfully tossed a wrapped package into Jaime's hands. Megan watched as Jaime carefully opened it. Inside the wrapping was a piece of paper. Jaime read it, then read it again, and Megan saw his jaw tighten. Let's move, Jaime said. What's wrong? Felix asked Jaime. The soldiers shot Thomas, Jaime said tersely. He's dead, and the police have Rubio. He was stabbed in a bar fight. What happened to Sister Teresa and Sister Lucia? Megan asked. I don't know. Jaime turned to the others. We have to hurry. He looked at his watch. The bank should be busy. He's going to rob a bank, Megan thought, and in the eyes of God, I'll be as guilty as he is. She crossed herself and began silently to pray. The Banco de Bilbao is on the ground floor of a 9-story apartment building on the Calle de Cervantes at the Plaza de Circular. When the car pulled up in front of the building, Jaime said to Felix, Keep the engine running. If there's any trouble, take off and meet the others in Logrono. Felix stared at him in surprise. What are you talking about? You're not going in there alone. You can't. It's too dangerous. Jaime slapped him on the shoulder. If they get hurt, he said with a laugh. Jaime Moreau walked through the 2 sets of doors that led to the marble lobby of the bank. There were lines of people in front of the 3 tellers' cages. Jaime stepped into a line and patiently waited his turn. When he reached the teller's cage, he smiled pleasantly and said, Buenas tardes. Jaime leaned against the window and pulled out the folded wanted poster. He handed it to the teller. Would you take a look at this, please? The teller unfolded it, and as he saw what it was, his eyes widened. He looked up at Jaime, and panic was in his eyes. It's a nice likeness, isn't it? Jaime said softly. As you can tell from that, I have killed many people, so one more really won't make a difference to me. Jaime pushed the attaché case toward the teller. I want you to fill this quickly and quietly. If you truly believe that the money is more important than your life, then go ahead and raise the alarm. The teller began to pull money out of the cash drawer and stuff it into the attaché case. His hands were trembling. When the attaché case was full, the teller said, There you are, senor. I promise you I won't raise any alarm. Jaime turned and strolled out of the bank. As Jaime came out of the bank and walked toward the car, Megan almost fainted with relief. He did it, she thought, and all by himself. Wait until I tell the sisters what happened. And then she remembered. She could never tell this to anyone. When she went back to the convent, there would be only silence for the rest of her life. They were driving through the rolling hills that heralded the approach to Burgos. How long were you behind the walls of the convent? Jaime asked Megan. 15 years. Jaime was astonished. Jesus! Hastily he added, I beg your pardon, sister. But it's like talking to someone from another planet. You have no idea what's happened in the world in the past 15 years. I'm sure that whatever changed is only temporary. It will change again. Do you still want to go back to a convent? The question took Megan by surprise. Of course. Unexpectedly, Jaime said, I'm sorry for wanting to desert you earlier, sister. It was nothing personal. I have had bad experiences with your church. Megan said earnestly, God cannot take sides, for he is in all of us. We are all a part of him, and when we try to destroy him, we destroy ourselves. To Megan's surprise, Jaime smiled. We are a lot alike, you and I, sister. We are. We may believe in different things, but we believe with a passion. Most people go through life without caring deeply about anything. You devote your life to God. I devote my life to my cause, but we care. There was a power in Jaime Moreau that was like a magnet. What will they do to you if the soldiers catch you? Megan asked. Execute me. He said it so matter-of-factly that for a moment Megan thought she had misunderstood. Aren't you afraid? Of course I'm afraid. We're all afraid. None of us wants to die, sister. We'll meet your God soon enough. We don't want to rush it. Have you done such terrible things? That depends on your point of view. The difference between a patriot and a rebel depends on who was in power at the moment. The government calls us terrorists. We call ourselves freedom fighters. But you don't have to concern yourself with any of these things, do you? Once you're back in the convent, you'll no longer be interested in the world outside. If I go back to a convent, Megan thought, I will be shut away from life again. And even as she thought it, Megan was appalled by the word if. When I go back, she corrected herself hastily. They camped that night in the woods. Jaime said, We'll be meeting the others at Logrono in 2 days, and a few hours after that, you'll be at the convent in Mendavia. Forever. Will you be all right? Megan asked. He smiled. Are you worried about my soul, sister, or my body? Megan found herself blushing. As Megan turned to lie down, she saw Amparo staring at her from the far end of the clearing. There was a look of naked hatred on Amparo's face. No one takes my man from me. No one. Early the following morning they resumed their journey. Megan and Jaime talked, and the conversation flowed easily, as though they had known each other forever. Amparo Giron sat listening to them, saying nothing, her face impassive. When I was a boy, Jaime told Megan, I wanted to be an astronomer. Megan was curious. What made you? I had seen my mother and father and sisters shot down and friends murdered, and I couldn't face what was happening here on this bloody earth. The stars were an escape. They were millions of light years away, and I used to dream of going to them one day and getting away from this awful planet. Megan was watching him, silent. But there is no escape, is there? In the end, we all have to face up to our responsibilities. So I came back down to earth. They reached Leon at dusk. The group took to the side streets, keeping a wary eye out for trouble. 20 minutes later, they arrived at a 1-story stone house nestled in a side street and surrounded by a high fence. During dinner, Jaime seemed unusually preoccupied. What's troubling you, amigo? Felix asked. Jaime hesitated. We have a traitor in the movement. There was a shocked silence. What makes you think that? Felix demanded. Colonel Acoca. He keeps getting too close to us. Felix shrugged. He's the fox and we're the rabbits. No, it's something more than that. What do you mean? Amparo asked. When we were going to blow up the dam at Puente La Reina, Acoca was tipped off. He looked at Felix. He set a trap and caught you and Ricardo and Zamora. If I hadn't been delayed, I would have been captured with you. Amparo's face was somber. Who do you think it is? Jaime shook his head. I'm not sure. Someone who knows all our plans. Then let's change our plans, Amparo said. We'll meet the others at Logrono and skip Mendavia. Jaime glanced at Megan. We can't do that. We have to get the sisters to their convent. Megan looked at him and thought, he's already done enough for me. I mustn't put him in greater danger than he's already in. She started to say, but if it's a problem, but he knew what she was going to say. Don't worry, Megan. We're all going to get there safely. He's changed, Amparo thought. In the beginning, he wanted nothing to do with any of them. Now he's willing to risk his life for her, and he calls her Megan. It's no longer sister. Jaime was going on. There are at least 15 people who know our plans. We have to find out which one it is, Amparo insisted. Jaime turned to Megan. Your last day. Tomorrow you'll be at the convent. You must be eager to get there. She looked at him a long moment. Yes. Not eager, Megan thought. Anxious. I wish I weren't anxious. I'm going to shut myself away from this, but for the rest of my life, I'm going to wonder what happened to Jaime and Felix and the others. I must put him out of my mind, she thought. When Jaime and Felix returned from a walk, Amparo was waiting for them at the door. Felix looked pale. Paco called, Amparo said excitedly. He has some information for you, but he didn't want to discuss it on the phone. He's sending someone to meet you. This person will be at the village square at noon. Jaime frowned. I'll go meet him. I want you to keep an eye on Felix. Amparo looked at him puzzled. I don't want him using the telephone. A flash of understanding crossed Amparo's face. You think that Felix is... Please, just do as I ask. He looked at his watch. It's almost noon. I'll leave now. I should be back in an hour. Take care. Don't worry. Megan heard their voices. I don't want him using the telephone. You think that Felix is... Please, just do as I ask. So Felix is the traitor, Megan thought. She had seen him go into his bedroom and close the door. Megan heard Jaime leave. All their lives were in danger. Amparo may need help, Megan thought. She started toward the living room, then stopped. A voice was saying, Jaime just left. He will be alone on a bench in the main plaza. Your men should have no trouble picking him up. Megan stood there, frozen. He's walking, so it should take him about 15 minutes to get there. Megan listened with growing horror. Remember our deal, Colonel, Amparo said into the telephone. You promised not to kill him. Megan backed into the hallway, her mind in a turmoil. So Amparo was the traitor, and she had sent Jaime into a trap. Backing away quietly so Amparo would not hear her, Megan turned and ran out the back door. Jaime was approaching the village square. In the middle of the plaza was a fountain and shade trees, with benches scattered around. Children were playing tag. A couple of old men were playing boule. Out of the corner of his eye, Jaime saw a police car pull up at the far end of the square. He looked in the other direction. A second police car had arrived. Officers were getting out, moving toward the park. Jaime's heart began to beat faster. It was a trap. But who had said it? Was it Paco who sent the message, or Amparo who delivered it? She had sent him to the park. But why? A block away, Megan was hurrying toward the park. As it came into view, she took in the scene at a glance. She saw Jaime seated on a bench and the policemen closing in on the park from both sides. Megan was walking past a groceria. Ahead of her, blocking her path, a mother was pushing a baby carriage. The woman stopped, set the carriage against the wall of the shop, and went inside to make a purchase. Without a moment's hesitation, Megan grabbed the handle of the baby carriage and moved across the street into the park. The police were walking along the benches now, questioning the men seated there. Megan elbowed her way past the policeman and walked up to Jaime, pushing the baby carriage ahead of her. She yelled, I've been looking everywhere for you. I've had enough. You promised to paint the house this morning, and here you are sitting in the park like some millionaire. Mother was right. You're a good-for-nothing bum. I never should have married you in the first place. It took Jaime less than a fraction of a second. He got to his feet. Your mother is an expert on bums. She married one. Who are you to talk? If not for my mother, our baby would starve to death. You certainly don't bring any bread into the house. The policeman had stopped, taking in the argument. Jaime and Megan noisily quarreled their way out of the park, pushing the baby carriage before them. The policemen turned their attention back to the men seated on the benches. 30 minutes later, Megan walked in the front door of the house. Amparo was nervously pacing up and down. Where have you been? Amparo demanded. I had to go out to take care of something. What? Amparo asked suspiciously. You don't know anyone here. Jaime walked in the door. The blood drained from Amparo's face. Jaime said quietly, Why, Amparo? And she looked into his eyes, and she knew that it was over. What made you change? She shook her head. I haven't changed. You have. I've lost everyone I loved in this stupid war you're fighting. I'm sick of all the bloodshed. I loved you, and I believed in you once, but her voice broke. This bloodshed has to end. Jaime walked up to her, and his eyes were ice. I should kill you. Felix had come into the room and was listening to the conversation. Jesus Christ, so she's the one. What do we do with the bitch? Jaime said, we'll have to take her with us and keep an eye on her. He took Amparo by the shoulders and said softly, if you try one more trick, I promise you'll die. He shoved her away and turned to Megan and Felix. Let's get out of here before her friends arrive. You had Moreau in your hands and you let him escape? Colonel, with all due respect, your men are assholes. You call yourselves policemen? You're a disgrace to your uniforms. The chief of police of Leon stood there cringing under the withering scorn of Colonel Akoko. I hold you personally responsible. I'll see that you're relieved from duty. Colonel, get out. You make me sick to my stomach. Colonel Akoko was boiling with frustration. There had not been enough time for him to reach Leon and catch Jaime Moreau. He had to entrust that to the local police, and they had bungled it. God alone knew where Moreau had gone to now. Colonel Akoko went to the map spread out on a table in front of him. They will be heading for Basque Country, of course. He recalled his conversation with the Prime Minister that morning. Your time is running out, Colonel. Have you read the morning papers? The world press is making us look like clowns. Moreau and those nuns have made us a laughingstock. Prime Minister, you have my assurance. King Juan Carlos has ordered me to set up an official inquiry board into the whole matter. I can't hold it off any longer. Delay the inquiry for just a few more days. I'll have Moreau and the nuns by then. There had been a pause. 48 hours. Now his career was in jeopardy, and all because some stupid policeman had let Moreau walk away under their noses. Jaime Moreau might hide anywhere. But the nuns... A wave of excitement coursed through Colonel Akoko. The nuns! They were the key. Jaime Moreau might hide anywhere, but the sisters could find sanctuary only in another convent. And it would almost certainly be in a convent of the same order. Colonel Akoko turned to study the map again. And there it was, Mendavia. There was a convent of the Cistercian order at Mendavia. That's where they're headed, Akoko thought triumphantly. Only I'll be there first, waiting for them. The journey for Ricardo and Graciela was coming to an end. The last few days had been the happiest that Ricardo had ever known. He was being hunted by the military and the police. His capture meant certain death. And yet none of that seemed to matter. We'll be married in church, Ricardo said. You'll be the most beautiful bride in the world. And Graciela could visualize the scene and was thrilled by it. And they went on dreaming. At dawn, from the top of a hill, they saw Logrono in the far distance. Where are we going to meet the others? Graciela asked. Ricardo pointed to a poster on a building they were passing. It read, Cirque Japon, the world's most sensational circus, fresh from Japan, July 24th for 1 week, Avenido Club Deportivo. There, Ricardo told her. We'll meet them there this afternoon. In another part of the city, Megan, Jaime, Amparo, and Felix were also looking at a circus poster. There was a feeling of enormous tension in the group. Amparo was never out of their sight. Ever since the incident at Leon, the men treated Amparo as an outcast, ignoring her most of the time and speaking to her only when necessary. Jaime looked at his watch. At police headquarters at Logrono, Colonel Ramon Akoko was finalizing his plans. Are the men deployed around the convent? Yes, Colonel. Everything is in place. Excellent. Colonel Akoko was in an expansive mood. The trap he had set was foolproof, and there would be no bungling policeman to spoil his plans this time. He was personally conducting the operation. The Cirque Japon was held in Logrono's outlying district of Guanos in a huge tent, and 10 minutes before the circus was to begin, the tent was filled to capacity. Megan, Jaime, Amparo, and Felix made their way down the crowded aisle to their reserved seats. The lights dimmed and the show began. "We'll wait another 15 minutes, Jaime decided. "If they're not here by then." A voice said, "Excuse me, are these seats taken?" Jaime looked up to see Ricardo and Graciela, and he grinned. "No, please sit down." And then in a relieved whisper, "I'm damn glad to see you." Ricardo nodded at Megan and Amparo and Felix. He looked around. "Where are the others?" "Haven't you seen the newspapers?" "Newspapers? No, we've been in the mountains." "I have bad news," Jaime said. "Rubio is in a prison hospital." Ricardo stared at him. "How?" "He was stabbed in a bar fight. The police picked him up." "Mierda." Ricardo was silent a moment, then sighed. "Well, we'll just have to get him out, won't we?" "That's my plan," Jaime agreed. "Where's Sister Lucia?" Graciela asked. "And Sister Teresa?" "Sister Lucia has been arrested. She was wanted for murder. Sister Teresa is dead." Graciela crossed herself. "Oh, my Lord." Colonel Akoko was receiving an excited report from an aide. "They were seen at the circus less than an hour ago. By the time we could bring up reinforcements, they had gone. They left in a blue and white van." "You were right, Colonel. They are headed for Mendavia." So it's finally over, Colonel Akoko thought. The chase had been an exciting one, and he had to admit that Jaime Moreau had been a worthy opponent. Through a pair of high-powered Zeiss binoculars, Colonel Akoko watched the blue and white van appear over the crest of a hill and head for the convent below. As the van approached the entrance to the convent and braked to a stop, Colonel Akoko barked into his walkie-talkie, "Close in, now!" 2 squads of soldiers armed with automatic weapons swung into position, blocking the road and surrounding the van. Colonel Akoko stood watching the scene for an instant, savoring his moment of glory. Then he slowly approached the van, gun in hand. "You're surrounded," he called out. "You haven't got a chance. Come out with your hands up, one at a time. If you try to resist, you'll all die." There was a long moment of silence, and then the van door slowly opened, and 3 men and 3 women emerged, trembling, their hands raised high above their heads. They were strangers. High on a hill above the convent, Jaime and the others observed Akoko and his men move in on the van. They saw the terrified passengers get out, hands raised, and watched the scene played out in pantomime. Jaime Moreau could almost hear the dialogue. "Who are you?" "We work at a hotel outside Logrono." "What are you doing here?" "A man gave us 5,000 pesetas to deliver this van to the convent." "What man?" I don't know. I never saw him before." "Is this his picture?" "Yes, that's him." They were in a white station wagon heading back to Logrono. Megan was looking at Jaime in wonder. "How did you know?" "The fox has to think like the hunter, Megan. I put myself in Akoko's place. Where would he set a trap for me? He did exactly what I would have done." "And if he had not shown up? Then it would have been safe to take you into the convent." "What happens now?" Felix asked. It was the question uppermost in all their minds. "Spain isn't safe for any of us for a while," Jaime decided. "We'll head directly for San Sebastian and into France." He looked at Megan. "There are Cistercian convents there." When they reached San Sebastian, they drove down the Avenida Sancho El Savio toward the beach. It was a cloudless summer day, and the streets were crowded with strolling couples bent on pleasure, and the harbor was awash with yachts and smaller craft. The distant mountains formed a picturesque backdrop for the city. Everything seemed so peaceful. When the car pulled up in front of the hotel, the group got out and followed Jaime into the lobby. Largo Cortez, the hotel owner, ran up to greet them. He was a large man. He had only one arm as the result of a daring exploit, and he moved awkwardly, as though off balance. "Welcome," he beamed. "I have been expecting you." He turned to look at Megan and Graciela. "Everyone is rooting for you, sisters. I have your rooms all prepared." "We'll be staying overnight," Jaime told him. "We'll leave first thing in the morning and cross into France. I want a good guide who knows all the passes." "I will arrange it," the hotel owner assured him. "There will be 6 of you?" Jaime glanced at Amparo. 5. Amparo looked away. Why don't you let me take you to your rooms where you can refresh yourselves? Then we'll have a magnificent supper. Amparo and I are going to the bar to have a drink, Jaime said. We'll join you later. Megan was watching Jaime, puzzled. She wondered what he planned to do with Amparo. Amparo was wondering too, but she was too proud to ask. Jaime led her into the bar at the far end of the lobby and took a table in the corner. When the waiter approached them, Jaime said, "A glass of wine, por favor." Amparo watched as Jaime took out a small packet and opened it. It contained a fine, powdery substance. "Jaime," there was desperation in Amparo's voice, "please, listen to me. Try to understand why I did what I did. You're tearing the country apart. Your cause is hopeless. You must stop this insanity." Wine on the table. When he walked away, Jaime carefully poured the contents of the packet into the glass and stirred it. He pushed the glass in front of Amparo. "Drink it. Jaime, I loved you once. You must believe me, please. Drink it." His voice was implacable. Amparo looked at him for a long moment, then picked up the glass. "I'll drink to your death." Jaime watched as Amparo put the glass to her lips and swallowed the wine in one gulp. She shuddered. "What happens now?" "I'll help you upstairs. I'll put you to bed. You'll sleep." Jaime rose and helped Amparo to her feet. She stood up unsteady. The room seemed to be rocking. In her room, Megan was thinking how strange it felt to be by herself in a hotel in a resort town. San Sebastian was filled with people on vacation, honeymooners, lovers enjoying themselves in 100 other hotel rooms. But what had Jaime done to Amparo? Could he possibly have... But no, he could never have done that. Or could he? And suddenly Megan wished Jaime were there with her, and she wondered what it would be like to have him making love to her. All the feelings that she had been suppressing for so long came flooding into her mind in a wild torrent of emotions. "I want him," she thought. "Oh, Lord, what's happening to me? What can I do?" Ricardo was whistling as he dressed. He was in a wonderful mood. "I'm the luckiest man in the world," he thought. "We'll be married in France tomorrow." In her room, Graciela was taking a bath, luxuriating in the warm water, thinking of Ricardo. She smiled to herself and thought, "I'm going to make him so happy. Thank you, God." The 5 of them met for supper in the hotel dining room. No one mentioned Amparo. When the meal was over, Megan rose. "I should be getting to bed." "Wait," Jaime said. "I have to talk to you." He escorted her to a deserted corner of the lobby. "About tomorrow." "Yes?" And she knew what he was going to ask. What she did not know was what she was going to answer. "I've changed," Megan thought. "I was so sure about my life before. I believed I had everything I wanted." And Jaime was saying, "You don't really want to go back to a convent, do you?" Due for an answer. "I have to be honest with him," Megan thought. She looked into his eyes and said, "I don't know what I want, Jaime. I'm confused." Jaime smiled. He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Megan, this fight will be over soon. We'll get what we want because the people are behind us. I can't ask you to share the danger with me now, but I would like you to wait for me. I have an aunt living in France. You would be safe with her." Megan looked at him a long time before she answered. "Jaime, give me time to think about it." "Then you're not saying no?" Megan said quietly, "I'm not saying no." None of the group slept that night. They had too much to think about, too many conflicts to resolve. Early the following morning, the group met in the lobby. Jaime approached Megan. "Have you thought about our conversation?" She had thought of nothing else all night. "Yes, Jaime." He looked into her eyes, trying to read the answer there. "Will you wait for me?" At that moment, Largo Cortez hurried up to them. With him was a leathery-looking man in his 50s. "I'm afraid there won't be any time for breakfast," Cortez said. "You should be leaving. This is Jose Cibrian, your guide. He will take you across the mountains into France. He's the best guide in San Sebastian." "I'm glad to see you, Jose," Jaime said. The group moved out into the street, painted yellow by the rays of the bright sun. Largo Cortez came out of the hotel to see them off. "Safe journey," he said, way Jose Cibrian ordered. The group started to turn toward the square, and at that moment, soldiers and members of the GEO suddenly materialized at both ends of the street, sealing it off. There were at least a dozen of them, all heavily armed. Colonel Ramon Acoco was leading them. Jaime glanced quickly toward the beach, looking for an escape route. Another dozen soldiers were approaching from there. There was no escape. They would have to fight. Jaime instinctively reached for his gun. Colonel Acoco called out, "Don't even think about it, Moreau, or we'll shoot all of you down where you're standing." Jaime's mind was racing furiously, looking for a way out. How had Acoco known where to find him? Jaime turned and saw Amparo standing in the doorway, a look of profound sorrow on her face. Felix said, "What the bloody hell? I thought you—" "I gave her a sleeping powder that was strong enough to knock her out until we got across the border. The bitch." Colonel Acoco was walking toward Jaime. "It's over." He turned to one of his men. "Disarm them." Felix and Ricardo were looking toward Jaime for guidance, ready to follow his lead. Jaime shook his head. Reluctantly, he handed over his gun, and Felix and Ricardo followed suit. "What are you going to do with us?" Jaime asked. Several passers-by stopped to watch the proceedings. Colonel Acoco's voice was curt. "I'm taking you and your gang of murderers back to Madrid. We'll give you a fair military trial and then hang you. If I had my way, I'd hang you here, now." "Let the sisters go," Jaime said. "They had nothing to do with this. They're accomplices. They're as guilty as you are." Colonel Acoco turned and gave a signal. The soldiers motioned to the onlookers to move aside to let 3 army trucks drive up. Colonel Acoco watched as his prisoners climbed into the army trucks. There was an angry murmur from the growing crowd. By now, many people had gathered in the street to watch what was happening. Colonel Acoco started to climb into the first truck. He called out to those in front of the truck, "Clear the way." From the side streets, more people began to emerge. "Move along," Colonel Acoco called. "Get out of the way." And still they came, the men wearing the wide Basque chapelas. It was as though they were responding to some invisible signal. Jaime Moreau is in trouble. They came from shops and homes. Housewives dropped what they were doing and moved out into the street. Shopkeepers, about to open for business, heard the news and hurried on to the hotel. And more came. Artists and plumbers and doctors, mechanics and salesmen and students, many carrying shotguns and rifles. They were Basques, and this was their homeland. It started with a few, and then 100, and within minutes it had swollen to more than 1,000, filling the sidewalks and streets, completely surrounding the army trucks. They were ominously silent. Colonel Acoco observed the huge crowd in desperation. He screamed, "Everybody get out of the way or we'll start shooting!" Jaime called out, "I wouldn't advise it. These people hate you. A word from me and they'll tear you and your men to pieces. There's one thing you forgot, Colonel. San Sebastian is a Basque town." He turned to his group. "Let's get out of here." Jaime helped Megan down from the truck and the others followed. Colonel Acoco watched helplessly, his face tight with fury. The crowd was waiting, hostile and silent. Jaime walked up to the colonel. "Take your trucks and get back to Madrid." The colonel stared at him for a long, murderous moment. "It can't end this way," he thought desperately. "I was so close." But he knew that it was worse than a defeat for him. He looked at the sea of people surrounding him. He had no choice. He turned to his driver, and his voice was choked with fury. "We're moving out." The truck started rolling down the street, and the crowd began to cheer wildly. It started out as a cheer for Jaime Moreau, and it grew louder and louder, and they were cheering for their freedom and their fight against tyranny. The streets reverberated with the noise of their celebration. Jaime took Megan's hand and said, "It's over. We're free. We'll be across the border in an hour. I want you to wait for me." She looked into his eyes. "Jaime." A man pushed his way toward them through the crowd and hurried up to Megan. "Excuse me," he said breathlessly. "Are you Sister Megan?" She turned to him, puzzled. "Yes." "I've had quite a time finding you. My name is Alan Tucker. I wonder if I could speak to you for a moment. This is very important. I've come all the way from New York to find you." Megan's heart began to beat faster. She had a sudden, blinding premonition. The stranger took her arm and walked her down the street, talking rapidly. What he had to say turned Megan's world upside down. She was finally going to learn who she was. When Tucker was through, he told her he would arrange for a passport for her. She would have to come with him to New York right away and meet Ellen Scott. Megan turned and saw Jaime standing in front of the hotel, waiting. "Excuse me a moment." She walked back to Jaime in a daze, and she felt as though she were living a dream. Jaime took Megan's hand. "I want you to come with me now. We belong together, Megan." And she looked at Jaime's strong, handsome face, and she thought, "I want us to be together. Jaime, I want to be with you, but there's something I have to do first." He studied her, his face troubled. "You're going to leave?" "For a little while, but I'll be back." "You can reach me through Largo Cortez. I'll come back to you, I promise." And she meant it. "The God of Israel joins you together. Blessed are all they that love the Lord, that walk in his ways. Glory." Ricardo looked away from the priest and glanced at Graciela standing at his side. "I was right. She is the most beautiful bride in the world." Graciela was still, listening to the words of the priest echoing through the cavernous vaulted church. There was such a sense of peace in the church. It seemed to Graciela to be filled with all the thousands of people who had come here generation after generation to find forgiveness and fulfillment and joy. "I feel as though I've come home again," Graciela thought, "as though I belong. Hear us, Almighty and merciful God, that what is done by our ministry may be abundantly fulfilled with thy blessing." He has blessed me more than I deserve. Let me be worthy of him. My times are in thy hands. I took a solemn vow to devote the rest of my life to him. The words seemed to reverberate in Graciela's head. She felt as though time had stopped. "O God, who has hallowed wedlock to foreshadow the union of Christ in the church, look in thy mercy upon this thy handmaiden, who is to be joined in wedlock and entreats protection and strength from thee." But how can he show me mercy when I am betraying him? Graciela was suddenly finding it difficult to breathe. The walls seemed to be closing in on her. That was the moment when Graciela knew, and she felt as though a great burden had been lifted from her. She was filled with an exalted, ineffable joy. The priest was saying, "May she win the peace of the kingdom of heaven. We ask thee to bless this marriage and—" "I'm already married," Graciela said aloud. There was a moment of shocked silence. Ricardo and the priest were staring at her. Ricardo's face was pale. "Graciela, what are you—" She took his arm and said gently, "I'm sorry, Ricardo. I don't understand. Have you stopped loving me?" She shook her head. "I love you more than my life, but my life doesn't belong to me anymore. I gave it to God a long time ago. You're a part of the world I gave up, the best part, but I did give it up. I must return to my world." Ricardo stared at her, shaken, and no words would come. It was as though something in him had died. Graciela looked at his stricken face, and her heart went out to him. She kissed him on the cheek. "I love you," she said softly, her eyes filled with tears. "I will pray for you. I will pray for us both. On a late Friday afternoon, a military ambulance drove up to the emergency entrance at the hospital at Aranda de Duero. An ambulance attendant, accompanied by 2 uniformed policemen, went through the swinging doors and approached the supervisor behind the desk. "We have an order here to pick up a Rubio Arzano," one of the policemen said. He handed over the document. Half a mile away, in front of the city jail, 2 detectives emerged from a police car and entered the building. They approached the desk sergeant. One of the men showed his badge. "We're here to pick up Lucia Carmine." The sergeant looked at the 2 detectives in front of him and said, "No one told me anything about this." One of the detectives sighed. "Goddamn bureaucracy. The left hand never tells the right hand what it's doing." "Let me see that release order." The detective handed it to him. "Colonel Acoca signed it, huh?" "That's right." "Where are you taking her?" "Madrid. The colonel is going to question her himself." "Is he? Well, I think I'd better check it out with him." "I don't have much time." "I have a lot of time, amigo. What I don't have is another ass if I lose mine over this." He picked up the phone and said, "Get me Colonel Acoca in Madrid." "Jesus Christ," the detective said, "my wife is going to kill me if I'm late for dinner again. Besides, the colonel's probably not even in." And the phone on the desk rang. The sergeant reached for it. "I have the colonel's office on the line." The sergeant gave the detectives a triumphant look. "Hello? It is important that I speak to Colonel Acoca." One of the detectives looked at his watch impatiently. "Merde, I have better things to do than to stand around and—" "Hello? Colonel Acoca?" The voice boomed out over the phone. "Yes? What is it?" "I have 2 detectives here, Colonel, who want me to release a prisoner into your custody." "Lucia Carmine?" "Yes, sir." "Did they show you an order signed by me?" "Yes, sir. Then what are you bothering me for?" "Release her," he shouted, and the line went dead. The sergeant swallowed. He has a short fuse, hasn't he?" the detective grinned. In the alley, in back of the police station, a small boy was watching a man on a telephone pole disconnect a clamp from a wire and climb down. 3 hours later, at an isolated farmhouse to the north, Lucia and Rubio Arzano were reunited. Jaime Moreau arranged for a guide to see that Lucia reached Zurich safely. She had arrived late at night. "It's like a dream," Lucia thought. "I'm looking out the window at the Swiss Alps. I'm actually here." Early the following morning, she left the Bar au Lac Hotel and stood in front of the bank, waiting for it to open. A kindly-looking middle-aged man unlocked the door. "Come in, please. I hope you haven't been waiting long." "No, I'm here about my Swiss bank account." "May I have the number, please?" "B2A 149207. He nodded. "One moment, please." The account amounted to a little over $13 million. "How would you like it handled?" the banker asked. "Could you transfer it to a bank in Brazil?" "Rio?" "Certainly. It will be there this afternoon." It was that simple. Lucia's next stop was at a travel agency near the hotel. There was a large poster in the window advertising Brazil. "It's an omen," Lucia thought happily. She went inside. "May I help you?" "Yes, I would like 2 tickets to Brazil." "There are no extradition laws there." She could not wait to tell Rubio how well everything was going. He was in Biarritz, waiting for her call. They would be going to Brazil together. "We can live in peace there for the rest of our lives," she had told him. Now everything was finally set. After all the adventure and the dangers, the arrest of her father and brothers, and her vengeance against Benito Patas and Judge Busqueta, the police looking for her and her escape to the convent, and Rubio Arzano, most of all, dear Rubio. How many times had he risked his life for her? He had saved her from the soldiers in the woods, from the raging waters at the waterfall, from the men in the bar at Aranda de Duero. The very thought of Rubio warmed Lucia. She returned to her hotel room and picked up the telephone, waiting for the operator to answer. There will be something for him to do in Rio. What? What can he do? He'll probably want to buy a farm somewhere out in the country. But then, what would I do? An operator's voice said, "Number, please." Lucia sat there, staring out the window at the snow-covered Alps. We have two different lives, Rubio and I. We live in different worlds. I'm the daughter of Angelo Carmine. "Number, please." He's a farmer. That's what he loves. How can I take him away from that? I can't do that to him. Lucia put the phone back in its cradle. The story appeared on the front page of the New York Times, and it leaped out at Megan. There was a photograph of Jaime Moreau. Below it, the communique read, "Jaime Moreau, leader of the ETA, the radical Basque separatist movement in Spain, was wounded and captured by the police during a bank holdup yesterday afternoon in Seville. The authorities have been conducting a search for Moreau since—" It was like a distant dream, photographed through a gauze curtain, hazy and unreal. This fight will be over soon. We'll get what we want because the people are behind us. I would like you to wait for me. Megan had an appointment with Prime Minister Leopoldo Martinez 24 hours after she arrived in Madrid. He invited her to Monclo Palace for lunch. "Thank you for seeing me so promptly," Megan said. He raised a hand in deprecation. "When the head of an organization as important as Scott Industries flies to my country to see me, I can only be honored. Please tell me how I can assist you." "I really came here to assist you. It occurred to me that while we have a few factories in Spain, we're not using nearly enough of the potential your country has to offer. Scott Industries is about to open a huge new electronics plant. And you have not decided in which country to open this plant? I'm personally in favor of Spain, but quite frankly, Your Excellency, some of my executives are not too happy with your civil rights record. They feel that those who object to some of the policies of the state are treated too harshly." "Do you have anyone in particular in mind?" "Well, as a matter of fact, I do. Jaime Moreau." The Prime Minister sat there staring at her. "This is something that cannot be negotiated, Miss Scott. Spain's honor is not for sale. You cannot buy us or threaten us." At 5 o'clock on the morning scheduled for the execution of Jaime Moreau, crowds began to gather outside the central prison. Warden de la Fuente had taken extra precautions to be sure that security would be tight at the instructions of the Prime Minister. And to avoid having Jaime's grave be made into a shrine, he had contacted Jaime's aunt in France and arranged for the body to be taken to her farm after the execution. At 11 a.m., Megan Scott appeared at the prison. She looked drawn and pale. She was received by Warden de la Fuente and the prison board. "I would like to see Jaime Moreau." The warden sighed. "I'm afraid that is not possible. But we are all aware of who you are. But the next one to see Jaime Moreau will be his God, if he has one." Megan stared at him, her face filled with despair. Could I just look at him for a moment? "I'm sorry," Warden de la Fuente said. "No." "May God have mercy on all of you," Megan said. They watched, silent, as she fled from the room. The warden entered Jaime's cell. "It's time." Jaime rose from his cot. He was handcuffed and shackled. "I was hoping you'd be late." There was an air of dignity about him that Warden de la Fuente could not help but admire. At another time, under other circumstances, we might have been friends. "The garrote?" Jaime asked. The warden nodded. Excruciatingly painful, inhuman. It was a good thing, the warden thought, that the execution would take place in a private room, away from the eyes of the public and the press. Inside the execution room, assistants strapped Jaime to a chair. The door was shut. Outside, the guards at the door could hear the chanting of the mob in the street. "You know something?" one of the guards grumbled. "I wish I was out there with them." At 2 o'clock that afternoon, Warden de la Fuente and his two assistants appeared at the office of the Prime Minister. The warden spoke. Mr. Prime Minister, we're here to resign. Martinez stared at them baffled. I don't understand. What? It is a matter of humanity, Your Excellency. We just watched a man die. Perhaps he deserved to die, but not like that, not strangled to death. It was barbaric. I want no part of this or anything like it, and my colleagues feel the same way. Here are our resignations. Late that night, a van crossed the French border and headed for the village of Bidache near Bayonne. The van pulled up before a neat farmhouse. The door to the farmhouse was opened by a woman in her middle 50s. You brought him? Yes, ma'am. She watched the two men carry in the body bag and set it on the floor. Thank you. De nada. She stood there watching as they drove away. Another woman walked in from the other room and ran toward the body bag. She hastily unzipped it. Jaime Moreau was lying there, smiling up at them. That garrote could be a real pain in the neck. White wine or red? Megan asked. At that moment, at Barajas Airport in Madrid, the warden and his two assistants were boarding a plane out of Spain. Each of them was $5 million richer. Epilogue. In 1978, Madrid tried to buy peace by offering the Basques limited autonomy, allowing them to have their own flag, their own language, and a Basque police department. The ETA replied by assassinating Constantin Ortil Gil, Madrid's military governor, and later Luis Carrero Blanco, the man chosen by Franco to be his successor. In October of 1987, the American consulate in Barcelona was wiped out by an explosion. In the spring of 1988, ETA bombed a civil guard post with 8 grenades. They assassinated a civil guard officer driving home with his wife and child, and murdered an 81-year-old retired general as he was leaving church. The violence keeps escalating. In the past 3 years, ETA terrorists have killed more than 600 victims, and the retaliation by the police has been ruthless. 10 years ago, ETA had the sympathy of the 2.5 million Basque people, but continued terrorism has eroded their support. In Bilbao recently, the very heart of the Basque homeland, 100,000 people took to the streets to demonstrate against ETA. The Spanish people feel it is time for peace, time to heal the wounds. As for the Cistercian convents of the strict observance, there are in existence today 54 convents worldwide, 7 of them in Spain. Their timeless ritual of eternal silence and seclusion remains unchanged.
Phoenix Audio Copyright 2006. Produced by Michael Wiener.
Audible hopes you have enjoyed this program.